afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our annual priority setting session. Welcome council members, members of the public. I believe we have folks also at home, right, participating today remotely. So welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. This is a very participative process that we do each year. In preparation for this annual priority setting session, we have a number of listening sessions. Anybody here participate in any of the listening sessions this year? Yeah, great. And we have them in both English and Spanish, and they're all translated into English and Spanish to ensure as much participation as possible. So what we do is we collect a lot of data from those listening sessions. And our wonderful staff has been great in summarizing those and starting to sort those into categories. Usually the categories are pretty similar, but the various issues that come up each year can differ. And each year we have quite a number of issues to contend with. Things changing in terms of, the external landscape, climate change, housing, and so we try to incorporate whatever's going on that impacts us, our budgets, etc. So again, this process is intended to identify our high-level policy issues and priorities, and then within those, we may also discuss a few key projects within those higher level. Usually we have about 5 or 6 high-level areas that we are focusing on. So let me quickly go over the agenda today. We will we will talk about capital improvement projects. We'll have a review. Maz, who is director of our Public Works Department, and that department spends a lot of time reprioritizing some of our projects based on budget, based on which ones are most critical to health and safety, which ones that we sometimes are waiting on funding and grants. So the prioritization process is pretty extensive and elaborate. So thanks, Maz, to you and your staff for helping put that together. At that point, we will then take a break, and we will start our priority setting exercise. So we will have a number of moments where we will ask for public comment, and both from in the room and people who are online. Matthew, am I forgetting anything?
No, we've done this pretty consistently for the last several years and had a pretty consistent format. We're making a few tweaks this year just based on feedback we heard from city council members at our retreat last weekend. And because we had our mid-year financial update just last Tuesday night, that will not be included as part of our meeting today. But we do have Ken Stiles, our finance manager, and Lisa Rossi, our admin services director, here to answer questions about the budget or provide clarifications if we need them. One thing that wasn't mentioned, but after Maz talks about the capital projects, we will have a little discussion, as much of a discussion as you'd like to have, about core services. Given the city's current financial situation, we think it's an important opportunity to stop and talk about the core functions of cities and some of the things that we do, and talk about what we do that is really required versus things that we do because they're values of the community and things we think are important, but we have more discretion over. And that, I think, helps set the context for priorities today as well. And as you mentioned, opportunities in 2 different settings to provide public comment as needed. So, thank you.
And I'll just say, one of the overarching goals is, we hope, and outcomes, is after all the listening sessions we've had, emails, we've also had a lot of emails that contributed to after the listening sessions. So we hope that by and large the public feels heard. Now, whether or not we all land on the same priorities, hard to say. We'll see how the process goes. But the good news is we have 5 council members here representing 5 districts. We keep our ears to the ground across the city and in our districts both. And in addition to all the feedback that we get at the feedback sessions, we spend all year getting a lot of feedback from from conversations we have and from your emails. So we will have an opportunity where each council member will identify what they consider, their top 3 priorities. We'll have conversations here among ourselves. And I'm positive. I feel like with the 5 members we have, that a lot of folks will feel that we did hear what they had to say. And if one of us misses a few things, I always feel that we're pretty good at backing each other up and filling in the blanks if someone misses some pieces. So yeah, how would we like to begin here, Matthew?
So I think we need to do our normal start the council meeting business, roll call and
We do have
pledge
some
of
normal
allegiance.
council protocols here, so we'll start with a roll call.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Nagengast.
Here.
Councilmember Penrose.
Here.
Vice Mayor Reddick.
Here.
And Mayor Brownstone.
Here,
We have a quorum.
thank you. We've had our introduction. Are we going to review any of the summary link that I see on here? Listening session summary?
I'll cover that when we get to the priority setting.
We'll do
portion
word
of
setting
it.
motion?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll continue right into the capital improvement project presentation from Moz. Great.
Good afternoon, Mayor Brownstone, members of the council and public. Maz Bazargunia, Public Works Director, here to present the CIP and review. Just an overview of the items today. Sorry, I'm used to saying tonight when I'm addressing council. It's odd being here during daytime, but I appreciate it. So just a quick review of what a capital improvement program is, and then wanted to just talk about the differences between projects and programs. And then we'll take a quick look at the current 5-year CIP that we've got identified overall. And in total, we have about 55 programs and projects for this current fiscal year. The estimated amount for projects over the next 5 years is about $88 million. A lot of that money is unfunded or tied to grants. So that is not a general fund figure. The next bullet underneath that, you can see, on average, the city had contributed about $3 million in general fund to the CIP annually. That was in prior years. Last year, as part of the budget process and addressing the structural deficit, that amount was smaller to at 1.8 million. And again, the key to this, the gap is looking at outside funding sources and grants for the majority of these projects that we're going to go over. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, what is a capital improvement program? It's really a tool that helps us develop and enhance our long-term projections for capital improvements through the community. It provides a long-term outlook, a snapshot on potential funding needs overall, and it also helps to project out resources as we move forward on a year-to-year basis. It gets updated annually, so every year you have the new 5-year projection that takes into account anything that's been changed, any changing in priorities, any new funding sources, and things of that nature. Next slide, please. Going right into the programs and projects. So the programs overall, just to categorize what they are annual, ongoing, they can be assumed as projects, but annual and ongoing operations. So things that aren't a one-time installation, one-time construction. Think about sidewalk repair and maintenance. So the first one, we have our Green Infrastructure and Stormwater Program. That was a program that is utilized to support our green water, our green infrastructure program overall. This last year, the funding was utilized towards closed circuit televisions of our infrastructure, of our storm drains, as well as reviewing, supporting some of the reporting that we need to do for our total maximum daily load program, which is our TMDL. That is a requirement from the State Water Board for Venice Beach. And then you can see that there's been a couple of programs that are unfunded, and essentially that was the difference, a big difference between what was previous allocations of general funds towards the CIP versus this current year. As part of the balancing of our budget due to the structural deficit, it was determined to either reduce or not fund certain programs on a one-time basis while we looked towards the next fiscal year. So again, these are based on 24-25 adopted capital program. As we go forward with this priority session and discussions of our capital improvement program long-term, these will be reviewed and updated as the council and community provide input. And then we go down to some of the other ones, like the ADA transition plan implementation program. So we generally utilize that to address citywide concerns with ADA improvements. This year, for example, we're looking at addition of new ADA ramps in current intersections that do not meet current standards. And then I'll go over the last two. The urban forest management program, that one is utilized to address our urban forest network. So think about any of our street trees or trees in public lands when we do removals or large-scale trimming. And that's the account that we utilize that from. And so that's an ongoing fund. These programs are all use it. If we use it that year, we use it that year. Whatever's not used gets back to the large pot, and then it gets reassessed as the new fiscal year comes forward and the budget gets adopted. So it is not a rolling account. And then the last one is our emergency response program. There's been no drawdown to date. That is essentially, that is what it states. It's for emergency purposes. So when, for example, when we had the major rain and flooding events of fiscal year 22-23, that was the funding source that we utilized to mitigate some of those costs while we were going back to a request reimbursement from FEMA and other agencies. Next slide, please. Continuing down on the list of programs, we have some of these programs are not general funds. So for example, our sewer programs utilize our enterprise funds from sewer collections and rates that all of our ratepayers pay to be connected to our sewer system. So the sewer maintenance program is one where we look at repairs and maintenance that requires more than just just our cleaning crew that we contract with SAM. So, for example, this last year we utilized funds to install a new overflow system at Valdez and Ocean Avenue, where we had a known area of concern with respect to potential sanitary sewer overflows. So that program funded that particular project. This program funded that small project to address that. We've also looked at, we also have a fund for inflow and infiltration monitoring. And so every time we have rain events or we have breaks in our lines, those do tend to seep into our sewer system. And so that program is looking at identifying those critical sections of pipe, repairing them, and assessing ways to improve our, reduce the amount of I&I that goes into our system. And then we go down to, I want to go over the pavement management and traffic safety program. So essentially that is our fund that we utilize for street maintenance. So that's maintaining our existing streets. We utilize that for chip seals, slurry seals, overlays, things of that nature. So not a new roadway construction or not a major reconstruction, but more ongoing maintenance. And so we utilize that program on an annual basis to get that funding through.
If I can just add some context, as you see this year, in this current fiscal year, there are several programs where they were not funded. Now, that doesn't mean that work doesn't get done within those programs or related to those programs. These programs are set up as a way to be really nimble from the staff side, where we have pots of funding where we can move on different projects. By defunding some of these this fiscal year, it just required that extra step of, if we need to do something that we would normally fund with these programs, we had to come to the council and get funding. I think a perfect example of that this year is the Main Street Bridge funding that we're using to replace all of the boards that create the walking paths on the Main Street Bridge, restucco it, repaint it. There are plenty of programs where in a previous year we would have just pulled funding from that and gone forward with the project. But because of the way we managed things this year, we just had to come to the council and talk about it and pull money from the general fund in order to move that forward. So by defunding these projects or programs this year, it didn't prevent work from happening. It just added an extra layer of discussion and oversight from the council before we move forward with some of these projects. And we focused on programs where we knew we had things coming or we knew we had to be really nimble. So just a little extra context for how we manage things this year.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Appreciate that. That is correct. And so I think that's the tail end of our programs. I wanted to just talk about the projects and some of the projects that are on our list. And you can see that they're in different, the way we've organized it is in different stages of the project. So I'll start about the projects on the planning and the conceptual level phase, and then we have things that have progressed into design, and then we have projects in construction. So the list we have in front of us here, I'll walk us through it. So the Urban Watershed Management Project, that one has not commenced yet. And that was due to just general staffing levels for a lot of our projects and programs. Overall, we have 2 engineers and not including myself, and 1 public works supervisor that work on our capital programs overall. And so between these 3 staff members, they are tasked with managing and contracting out all of these different projects and overseeing the consultants and environmental design firms and everybody in between. So some of these projects have not commenced, and sometimes that is related to just general staffing levels. Not that they aren't necessary or that we don't want to move forward on them. And the urban watershed management was a big one. That is one that we're actually looking at starting up in the near future. And we're currently working on a request for proposals from hydraulic firms that can help us support this effort. And we have funding that's been set aside from previous budget cycles. So that funding for projects, that does roll over. So if we don't utilize it in one fiscal year, it does have an opportunity to roll into the next. So the Keogh watershed was separated out from the larger urban watershed because of some of the concerns and sensitivity around that particular watershed. So we had already broken it up. The urban watershed management program would be a larger level review, the way that we've envisioned it of the other watersheds within our cities, within our city limits and boundaries. And so we've basically taken that one out, and there is a potential project that we were considering. In previous discussions, we had talked about looking at beachwood property and utilizing that towards erosion and sediment transport concerns, as well as flooding for some of the Keogh neighborhood and some of the other surrounding neighborhoods. And so that one was a little bit more defined, and that's why it's been pulled out of the urban watershed plan.
So the RFP that's going out for the urban watershed plan will not include, specifically eliminates the Keogh.
Correct. That wouldn't be part of the scope, and the idea was that scope would be part of the Keogh watershed project specifically.
I'll also just share that the urban watershed management plan is, as Maud said, is overarching, which means it will inform future other projects for each of the watersheds, kind of help us prioritize and figure out how we'll manage them. So in the future, we may have some of the other watersheds with their own specific projects informed by that overarching urban watershed plan.
Thanks, Matthew.
Can I get a clarification? Were you going to ask, I was going to ask questions at the end of the presentation, or should we ask them as they come up? I think that was a great question to ask.
That's really up to the mayor.
Can you save your questions?
Yes.
Just so we can get through it? Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, appreciate it.
Some of the other projects that have been on the list, so we have the train depot. That one's been on hold. That's going to be on hold now moving forward. That was a current action with the Carter Park funding amendment. So there's been, those are just some of the updates I'm providing here. We have been, Magnolia Park has been another large project that's been on our list. We have done some master planning around that particular park. And we have an RFP that's ready to be circulated out for design and environmental on that project. And I won't read off the list, but I'm happy to go back to any of these projects as the questions come up. Next slide, please. Here we kind of continue down some of the other projects that we had. So this is, we've got a couple of ones I want to highlight. The local road and safety plan, that has not commenced yet. We have some funding from Caltrans to do a large-scale assessment of local roads for safety needs. And so that'll be something that will start up in the next couple of months. We're just waiting on the funding agreements to be signed so that we can ensure that we follow the proper protocol. We want to make sure that we are able to tap into the grant funding that we've been provided. So there's just, it's more of a programmatic process to go through. So we'll get that one started soon. Another fantastic project that we've got underway shortly is the Highway 1 South Corridor Study, and that is through a significant grant from the Transportation Authority to do a assessment of our Highway 1 and right-of-way needs. So think congestion management, alternative modes of transportation on Highway 1 from 92 to the southern limits of the city. So that's another one that's majority grant funded that will be starting up in the near future. And then we've got a number of large-scale transportation projects, Poplar Street Phase 2, Kelly and Highway 1 intersection, as well as Kelly Avenue Complete Streets project that we're looking at grant funding opportunities. Next slide, please. Now moving forward, we have a couple of other projects that have been on the front burner, but due to various needs have been delayed. So the one here is the Coastal Trail Overlay. We had originally planned to do this in early 2023, but due to the erosion and storm impacts, we had to do some emergency work, and so we're looking at incorporating that in the coming months to do that maintenance of that segment of Coastal Trail there. The next project I wanted to highlight was the pedestrian and bicycle connection to Hatch Elementary in the Alsace-Lorraine neighborhood. That's been an identified project under the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan. It's been on our CIP for a little while, and I'm happy to report that the Transportation Authority of San Mateo County also approved funding, a grant fund for that project as well. So we will be starting design and environmental in the near future and hope to get to construction sometime in the next fiscal year. And then moving on down the list, the East Side Parallel Trail Segment 2, that is the portion of the East Side Trail from Spindrift to Russo Francais. And that we have a earmark from former Congresswoman Jackie Spears that we're utilizing for the design and environmental phase of that project. There's been a little bit of back and forth with Caltrans on the grant agreement. They generally take a little while to get through, but we'll be starting that soon as well. And then I'll jump down to the East Side Parallel Trail South Segment 1. So again, that one has not commenced because of the study. We're going to complete the study, and then we'll come back and scope this particular project out, and we'll move forward. Next. Now I'm going to go into a little bit on the projects in the design phase. So we have a number of projects that we've been moving forward on. The Downtown Streetscapes Master Plan implementation. That one is basically the Gateways project, the Gateways entry signs that the city's commenced on, and that will be going to the Architectural Advisory Committee this Thursday for anybody that's interested, 9 a.m. So that project's currently in design. We've got a couple of watershed projects here as well. And then I wanted to just highlight the Wavecrest Water Main and Smithfield. That's a project that we've been working on. That one's currently getting close to the end of the design phase, and we're working on the environmental document, and we hope to circulate that soon. That project is tied to a donor that's looking at funding at least the first phase of improvements, which would incorporate the water main extension that's necessary for service as well as fire suppression, and also parking lot improvements and stormwater management. Our HVAC and roof repairs, that project's been moving forward, and actually that supplements a project we have with Peninsula Clean Energy to do a couple of solar arrays, one at the sheriff's substation and one at City Hall. And so we are continuing to move forward on the coastal development permit on that and working with PC on the design. And we hope to have those done in the next fiscal year. And then just a quick update on the Highway 1 safety project, the North project. That's the large Highway 1 project from North Main Street to Spindrift. That particular project is we're finalizing the design. That's pretty much wrapped up. We're waiting for encroachment permits from Caltrans. There is an overlap with the Caltrans shop project where they are doing a major highway pavement restoration project from Wavecrest all the way to Montera or Moss Beach. And so we're going to coordinate with them closely. We are not anticipating to start construction until November of this calendar year while we wait for them to complete some of their work, and we try to avoid the rush of October for the coast side. Next slide, please. Now I'm gonna transition to some of the projects that we have that are further in progress and in construction. So we have our phase 2 of our climate action and adaptation plan. We are nearing completion of that particular project. We are actually considering some of the new information that's come out from CAL FIRE on that particular one, as we have new fire maps, the hazard maps that folks are familiar with. This study was commenced about a year ago, and so the maps that were available at that time, at this point, are out of date. So we're looking at the implications of that change and what that would mean for the contract and the project moving forward. But again, we're getting close to the end of that. We hope to have that wrapped up soon. Carter Park is another large project that we've been working on for several years. I won't go into the details here, but we are getting towards the final stages of construction, and we hope to have that opened up by May and to start utilizing that site and and have it available for events and public use moving forward. We're getting close to the tail end of our Poplar Street project. There are some minor completion elements remaining, and I'll report back to City Council that I'll be bringing on the 18th. But we're getting close to the end of construction there, and that will free up staff time to start working on some of the other projects that either haven't commenced or are earlier in the design phase. And then the last one I want to highlight is the safety element. That was housed in the CIP. It's an update to our safety element, and currently internal staff are working with the consultant to finalize that in the near future. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share this, and we can kind of go back to this. These are snapshots out of our adopted capital improvement program. If anybody goes on our website, this will be the first few pages in that document, and this is the 5-year projection. So again, it shows the project allocations of previous years in the 4th column, and then the fiscal year 24-25, which was the adopted year. That's the one that has the funding adopted as part of this program. When you go into the future years, those are either accounting for future funds, whether it's repeating funds like gas tax and Measure M and W through different transportation sources, or one-time project-specific grants. Those are captured there, or the unfunded portion, which is that total on the far right of the screen. Next slide. And so here, again, it continues through the different sections of the CIP: facilities, sewer, streets, and then finally with trail improvements. And overall, this is an ongoing 5-year update. So every year we do update these projections based on council priorities, based on community input, based on needs that arise over the year. And so again, we'll be bringing this back with revisions, based on this meeting, as well as internal revisions we've made over this year, as we move forward with the budget process in a future council meeting. And that's it for the presentation. Thank you for your patience. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Maz. I believe Councilmember Negengast had a question from earlier.
Well, I had several. I didn't know if you wanted just to move.
Why don't you
Down.
go through them?
Okay, I'd be happy to. First, that's a lot of, I'll say, stuff. And it is. It's very ambitious, I think, on our part. I think a lot of it we're counting on getting grants, right? Because, and hopefully this has helped me understand what we're capable of doing and or, what can we bite and chew and digest it instead of, yeah, I can do that. So just some of these questions, bear with me. I just want to get through it. So you had programs versus projects. Now, our programs essentially, and I'm trying to oversimplify it maybe, is that something that staff themselves complete, or is it a combination of staff and or minor? I'm trying to understand when does a program become a project, or are there projects within a program, or how does this work?
That's a great question. So the way that programs are set up is for those smaller projects. Now, there are cases where the majority of the time for those programs, it's an in-house design because it's something that's not overly complicated. Generally doesn't require a coastal development permit, so it's either exempted out or part of a previous CDP. And so usually we do it in-house as far as the design, and it depends on the type of construction. We may hire a contractor to come in and implement the design, or we may use internal staffing. It just really depends on the particular project. But yes, they're generally smaller in nature. They won't reach the overall project scope that you see in a large CIP project, like a highway improvement project. So if we're doing, for example, the street maintenance work, that's one that we'll design in-house, but we don't have the internal paving crew. So that would be something that would be contracted out, but in-house design. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, potholes. Do we do, and let me follow that up with, we do temporary fixes on potholes only and then do permanent fixes come later? And could you explain the difference between a temporary and a permanent?
Absolutely. So the temporary pothole repairs is what you usually see when they come out, and that'll be mostly our crew. So we'll get cold mix asphalt from the local plant, and that'll be done with our local crews. When it gets to the level of, so when we want to address those potholes as part of an improvement under the capital program, that would be under the programmatic category. So and again, that would be contracted out, as we don't have the staff or the equipment to do hot mix work for pothole repair. And a lot of times when we have a pothole of that nature, a lot of times we'll also consider a dig out or a more robust street overlay, depending on the severity of those impacts.
When would you contract it out? Because we have local contractors, they could do hot mix. I don't know if that.
So that's the defining factor. When it becomes a hot mix project, because of the ability of our crews and the lack of the proper equipment, anything hot mix, we go contract out. Correct.
And we do not temporary or hot mix Highway 1 or Highway 92.
We try not to because it's an additional expense that we do have to incur, even though it's not our facility. I know that on certain opportunities, our maintenance crews, when we don't get the support from Caltrans as we'd like, I know we've done some cold repairs minimally as an add-on to work that we're already doing in the area. But generally, when we have a Highway 1 related pothole, we will update the Caltrans maintenance request database and track it from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of roadway miles is theirs. Urban Forest Management Plan Program. So you mentioned what trees are maintained by the city versus our property owners requirements. Because sometimes it gets, but, bless you. But sometimes it gets, again, who maintains what? Who decides they're going to maintain a tree? Even though a tree may be in the public right-of-way, it may not be maintained by the city. Is that true?
Generally, it depends. There's certain projects that, based on their approvals, could be a little different, but I would say overall, the trees in the public right-of-way are assumed to be public trees. And so that's generally something that we manage. So when the city, when the downtown Main Street trees, for example, were worked on several years ago after the 22-23 storms, that was a city-led effort. There are trees on private properties, and those don't count towards it. But there's also publicly owned lands, like Beechwood, for example. If there's any tree maintenance required on that property, that would be part of this program. It would be a city-owned tree.
Or that area between Magnolia and Seymour?
Exactly. So that Magnolia Park site is a city-owned parcel,
Right.
so the maintenance of those trees would be city responsibility.
But I have a tree in the public right-of-way fronting my house. You don't maintain it?
If you request us to come out, we'll come and look.
You would. I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
I assume property owners are responsible for things in their area. And that's why I was trying to decide, or to understand, when does the city decide they're going to maintain a tree or not?
Generally, we look at it from a safety aspect, and so when we get a request, we do get requests to look at public trees in front of properties quite often, and when we get those, we want to go out and take a close look. First, to identify whether it's a city tree or not. Sometimes if they're in the front yard, they may be on the private property,
Right.
but close to the public right of way. So we do that assessment, and then if it's deemed to be a city tree, we will get an arborist out to take a look, especially when it's a safety related issue, because we want to try to address those things quickly. And if it's more of an aesthetic or something that a property owner wants to do, we have on occasion allowed that to happen with an arborist report if somebody privately wanted to fund it.
Do we have a list of city trees?
We have a database that we can share. It's older. I think it does. We've been talking internally about getting an update to that database, but we do have one available.
Okay, because trees can uplift sidewalks, curb gutter, and was it city's responsibility then to repair the sidewalks, curb gutter?
It is. It is to a certain extent. When we talk about sidewalks, curbs, and gutters, there has been past council conversations about responsibility of maintenance, and the way that was discussed several years ago was that the council didn't want to put the burden of repairs of sidewalks on private properties, especially for long-term, for areas that have not been addressed for many years. As we do work and improve the areas, we do notify the property owners that moving forward, they would be their responsibility to maintain. And I think that's a good talking point as far as who's responsible when it has a tree, when it's a public tree related to that. I don't think that level of detail was reviewed previously.
Okay. And then the neighborhood traffic safety program, who decides what you do? Is it based on feedback from, let's say, a block or a neighborhood that approaches you? Or if they approach the council member, would a council member just approach, say, Matthew and bring this up? Or is that something, I'm trying to decide when things should be in a public forum versus who decides it's a neighborhood safety program item?
So that one, so we actually wanted to commence with that program as far as setting policies. We don't have a policy established currently for dealing with neighborhood safety traffic requests. So what we want to do with that particular project is actually come back to council with the policy for public discussion on how to move forward. Generally, what I've seen in other jurisdictions and what I've done is it usually is a petition process, and then there's a formal review process established. And then, depending on data that's gathered, whether it's, traffic counts and speed data, along with geometric concerns, we want to establish a policy so that we can start looking at implementing this program. It hasn't been implemented yet. And so it's, at this point, it's been, as needed. When an issue comes up, we take a close look at it and see if we can implement it with a bigger project. But the hope with that program would be that we would establish a set process so that residents understand how to move forward, how to get prioritized, and then it'll have a public process to formally approve them moving forward.
Right, and I know speed humps, maybe other calming measures might come under that, but things that, trying to keep it, if it's possible, simple. I mean, would that have to be in a, we don't have to answer it now, but I'm trying to, does that need to be in a policy or not? I'm trying to figure out, what should be or not. You don't have to answer it, but that just, okay, that helps me. The urban watershed management plan. I'm trying, is that what we used to call a stormwater master plan? Is that? Okay.
That's correct.
So, and it, I understood Kehoe has been identified. I think there's a few more we know. I'll go with Pullman, and I know Seymour, and there could be others. So I'm wondering the urban watershed management plan, how much, I get into what cost is there, what benefit, what are we going to do versus some things maybe we know we should be doing now, and maybe we do that. Okay, so I was just, so the urban watershed management is just citywide? Does it include areas that drain into the city?
That was the idea of the watershed management plan, was to look at the tributary area overall, because the last storm drain master plan that was completed actually did not take a closer look at those watersheds. And so some of the volumes and improvements that were recommended from that, the data wasn't really supporting it. And so what this would do is look at that at a watershed level basis, and then ultimately would come up with a list of priorities and recommended projects to address some of those concerns. Now we've, I think in past conversations, it has been discussed whether we want to do that citywide, kind of as a master plan type of document, or if we wanted to come in and just jump into watersheds individually. And that is something that, I think staff were open to, whichever direction we want to go with it. I think it's a big picture policy question that I think we can implement either way.
Okay. And then about the park master plan, or some kind of, I saw, and you were quick on the screen, but to implement some park master plan, but we know some parks, we've already implemented Carter. I know there's going to be another one that's going to come up. And so I'm trying to understand what more parks are there? I mean, what is there more that we need to, because we know the parks or areas to be a park, I believe, unless there's some others that are being considered. Maybe.
We have, so that was generally used for small improvements. So it could be, the parks master, there was a larger parks master plan that was done 2017, and it had small pieces like additions of swings or something, so small bites of the apple that we were utilizing that programmatic funding mechanism to deliver. Carter Park wouldn't be part of that because that's its own larger project. Even the Frenchman's Creek Phase 2 is larger than that scale. So we can revisit that, whether it's necessary or not to have that programmatic funding category. But generally, it was used to do small improvements at parks.
All right. Okay. That's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Nagengast and Maas, for answering questions. Councilmember Johnson, did you have some follow-up questions? No. Councilmember or Vice Mayor Riddick.
Thank you to Councilmember Nagengast for asking some of the questions that I was interested in. I have one question. What is the Coastal Bluff Restoration Program?
That's a good one. So that program was put into place before the 22-23 storms, if I remember correctly. And the intent was to look at the different areas of our bluffs that have been eroding and looking at opportunities to address some of those concerns. So one of the areas that we first saw was like the Kelly Avenue outfall. That one we ended up moving forward on an emergency basis, But that project was basically to establish a funding source to address some of these larger repair issues. As we've seen a fluctuation in storm events, duration, and intensity, we're starting to see that acceleration during certain seasons of bluff erosion. And so that was utilized towards a funding mechanism to deal with some of those issues as they came up. There was a larger Poplar Gateways project that is currently unfunded. That was a larger master plan implementation that was going to look at some pretty significant improvements in infrastructure along the at least that portion of the bluff between Kelly and Poplar. But that project, the staff looked at getting funding a couple of times, and it was really challenging to find a funding source to implement that particular project. And I think at this stage, given the storms that we've seen, we may want to revisit that program to see if we want to make modifications.
Councilmember Penrose, you're good? I'm good too. Sure, go ahead.
I have one more, I'm so sorry. On the east side of Highway 1, the trail, now our Highway 1 trail project, or the one, oh. Is that better? Hello?
I haven't heard what you guys have said. I heard all the noise, but I haven't understood what you said for the last 5 to 10 minutes.
The Highway 1 trail project, is that better? Does that work? Okay, thanks. So the Highway 1 terrace, the north project, how far does the trail on the east side go to?
The Highway 1 North project, it adds the east side parallel trail from North Main Street, where the high school meets the Chevron station. And so from that location, it goes north on the east side to Spindrift. And then we have the second segment of the North Trail. That's the one we have funding for design and environmental. That would complete the gap from Spindrift to Russo Francais. And then from there, we have the existing east side parallel trail that goes up through Rocket Farms. And then we have the segment 4 of the north end that's close to completion design. And that would connect us on that end to the county trail that was completed a couple years ago.
So you have designs almost completed?
For that northern?
Just for that. Does that have a bridge involved or no?
Some small prefabricated bridges.
Okay. And then the one just beyond the Frenchman's Creek subdivision that goes down, is that one designed yet or no to Spindrift?
No, that one we have the funding towards the design, and we're going to go out for RFP. That one will require a pretty significant pedestrian bicycle bridge as you span Frenchman's Creek.
All right, but that's a vital link to get us all the way to Main Street then, assuming all these other components get completed.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again. Good question. So we're now going to move on. Our city manager, Matthew, will go over our core services, a brief discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, the context around this has a lot to do with the city's current financial situation. We've been in an identified structural deficit, which means our revenues are not keeping pace with our costs of delivering services. And the growth, as we see in this year's mid-year budget, is accelerating. So costs of delivering services for a variety of reasons, inflationary costs of goods and services that are out there, staffing costs, all of those things are outpacing the growth of our revenues. And we have some revenues that have stagnated or gone flat and gone backwards the last few years related to tourism and sales tax. And so what I think is important for us this fiscal year as we work on our priorities, as I mentioned at our last meeting, we've got several vacancies that have happened over this year within City Hall. And many of those I've chosen to hold open, which has its own consequences for our ongoing programs and projects and our ability to deliver on them and customer service in other areas. But I think we're in a good place to really look at how we're structured, what our core services are, and how we staff for just basic services to provide to the community. And then we look at what resources we want to allocate to special projects and priorities. And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time today just kind of talking about the core services of a city. Scope creep has been an issue for all cities, and a lot of it has to do with the state and the counties kind of stepping away from some of the things that they've done in the past, or new things coming up that kind of hot potatoes, no one takes them, and the community expects somebody to pick them up, and cities end up picking them up. And then some of them just have to do with the values and the priorities of our city council as it sits at any given time. I'll try to be quick with this. I know we spent quite a bit of time on the CIP, but that is a core function of the city, and I think it was a good lead into this discussion. One of the things the council had asked me for when I brought up this concept was, is there something out there that we can use as like a guide? You know, this is what cities do. And in my research and talking with my colleagues and actually some academics, there's no single answer for this because cities are so varied across this state. I did find a good document from the State Legislative Analyst's Office, and I just want to share a couple of brief items from this. And I think the paper that I'm working on is something we might just publish to the website so people have access to it and council can look at it, but it is currently a work in progress. Local government consists of counties, cities, school districts, and special districts. And each of those different groups has specific things that are assigned to them, and then there's some overlap. So counties are actually subdivisions of the state. They act on behalf of the state. Their relationship to the state is different than cities and other districts. They have responsibilities for enacting state responsibility for things like criminal justice, mental health, and social service programs, and we see that here in San Mateo County. The Human Services Agency is a large agency that provides, acts on behalf of the state in offering general assistance programs and housing programs and welfare programs. Criminal justice, obviously, there's a strong relationship between the county and its work and the criminal justice requirements that happen at the state. The other thing that counties have responsibility for are some administrative functions for the state, collecting and distributing property tax, which is the main revenue source for statewide activities in government. And then, of course, they provide local services for unincorporated areas. We see that on the coast, anything between Devil's Slide and the north end of Half Moon Bay, the Miramar divider. Those services, those municipal services are provided by the county, and then going south, just south of Miramontes Point Road, they're providing those services down to the county line. City services are where you see really varied responsibilities. There are 480 cities in California. About a quarter of them are what we call full service. That means they provide all municipal services to their residents. Even that can vary depending on what is available, but police, fire, libraries, parks and rec, road maintenance. Some cities have airports, some cities have marinas. It really depends on where they're located and what infrastructure exists there. Most of the cities are more similar to Half Moon Bay in that we provide some of those municipal services directly, some of those services are contracted out, and other services fall to our special districts. And that is really the case here on the coast side. Sometimes you call a city like ours a contract city. We're kind of in between. There are some cities in San Mateo County even that they have a minimal amount of administrative staff, and then they contract out all of the services and all the work that happens within the city. We're somewhere in between. Obviously, having staff allows us to develop relationships with the community, support the community, understand the needs of the community, and have direct impact on the work that goes out. But contracts allow us to be more nimble, to bring in specialists, people with specialized expertise. And so that's the approach Half Moon Bay's taken for many, many years. I won't get into schools, but education is handled by school districts, and that is the case here in Half Moon Bay. And then special districts, there are 3,000 special districts in California. Sometimes it feels like they're all here on the coast, but we have a bunch. And each of them has a very specialized function, and most of those specialized functions happen across the entire coast side, both Half Moon Bay city limits and the unincorporated areas. The fire district, of course, is to me the most prominent example of that. They serve the entire coast side. They have responsibility. They have tax revenue to provide those services. And they're a partner of ours, but they have that ultimate responsibility. We have the Coastside County Water District, which serves Half Moon Bay and parts of the unincorporated coast. And then you have the Montero Water and Sanitary District, which captures the rest of the coast from the water standpoint. When you talk about core services for a city, again, it can really vary, but I'll just list out some of the things that residents expect from local government and from their cities. Police, fire, and EMS services, 911 dispatch, road and sidewalk maintenance. We've talked a lot about that today. Parks and recreational facilities are typically provided by cities. Services has grown, that a lot of people look to cities to supplement that, including mental health, homelessness support, rental assistance programs, affordable housing programs, those types of things. Of course, nonprofits have filled a huge gap there and are part of that service provision. Public transportation, we're part of a major public transit district here in San Mateo County, but any holes that appear in there, people come to cities looking for ways to solve some of those issues. Community events and support. It used to be that a lot of events were just put on by private organizations and cities kind of collaborated. Now it's so important for our communities to gather, and coming out of COVID, people want that. And so cities have started to take on those responsibilities, both leading those events and putting them on, but also providing financial sponsorship, road closures, code enforcement, oversight for setup and cleanup. It's become a major function of cities of late. And then the last item I'll just say is just more expanded and specialized services. So even the scope of core services has grown and changed as expectations of communities has grown, as the needs of communities have grown, and a lot of that falls on the cities. I won't get into too many specifics. In Half Moon Bay, specifically, as I shared, we do a lot of shared work, whether it's partnerships, contracting, or these special districts. And I just want to run through a little bit just for context for everybody. Public Works, of course, that is a major function of our city. It's our largest internal department. They manage all of our capital projects, which you heard today. But there are other agencies that have roles. The state, Caltrans specifically, has responsibility for our highways and all of our traffic lights. The city doesn't maintain or have responsibility for any of the traffic lights on the coast. Those are all handled by Caltrans within city limits. There are public beaches, some of which are ours, some of which are the counties, some of which are the states, and there's different responsibilities related to that and some of the associated infrastructure. And then, as I mentioned, our Public Works is very involved in community events and supporting those community events that happen throughout the year. Our planning and building department, community development department is focused only within the city limits. They process entitlements. They develop and enforce policies related to land use. Because we're completely within the coastal zone, we have a relationship with the Coastal Commission, and it's our responsibility to enforce certain sections of the coastal zone and what the Coastal Commission expects, and that's found mostly in our land use plan. And we have to enforce the Coastal Act in certain areas. Parks and Recreation, as a city, we own 12 parks and 3 beaches, but we actually lack a lot of common amenities that other cities and towns provide. And in my 8 years with the city, I've thought a lot about this, and especially my childhood here on the coast, where I never wanted for anything. If we wanted to do something, it was there. And one of the biggest changes I think that's happened is, growing up, the school district provided a lot of those parks types amenities. The city didn't build basketball courts because the schools were open after school. If we wanted to play basketball after school, we were at Cunha or El Granada, up and down the coast. And for good reason, a lot of things have changed about the relationship between school properties and the community and who accesses them and when. But that's created a hole where a lot of amenities that other cities might have kind of been removed from public access, at least in the way that they used to be available. And so that puts us in a position where we're trying to find other ways to provide facilities, provide offerings. Of course, the school district is an important partner of ours. The Boys and Girls Club provides so many youth programs, and Senior Coastsiders fills a lot of those holes where some cities have robust senior programs. Senior Coastsiders is a nonprofit that provides for that here on the coast and are a really important partner. I could name dozens of other nonprofits that step into this realm and are partners, but it allows for more robust rec programming than the city is able to offer. We've talked about economic development, community vitality. We have staff that work closely with the Chamber, with the Downtown Business Association, with the Hotel Business Improvement District on supporting businesses, marketing the coast side, and trying to create new industries here on the coast. The OCC, the Opportunity Center, is a great example of a partnership where funding from the county partnered with city efforts and nonprofit expertise have created some really robust programs. We have the CSFA grant program that supports a lot of the social services offered by our nonprofits. And all of this is geared towards just having a vibrant and sustainable community for the people that live here. Public safety and emergency preparedness, again, this is where it gets very broken up. Fire and EMS are provided by the Fire Protection District. Police services in Half Moon Bay are provided under contract by the sheriff. The county has a Department of Emergency Management that can step in certain emergencies that are regional in nature. And then the city has responsibilities to plan, prepare, and educate our community around emergency preparedness and provide support to those other agencies that have specific responsibilities in emergencies. We've also stepped into the public safety response realm with the CARES program. And of course, we're looking for opportunities for other agencies to take that burden from a financial standpoint at least and continue to offer those services that we find necessary. The library, and I'm almost done here, the library building is owned by the city but operated by the San Mateo County Library JPA, who actually collects taxes from our tax base and provides services and programs that are beloved here on the coast. And so the city doesn't have to take that responsibility to provide those services. Water and sewer, I've mentioned the different agencies that provide for that. Sewer, we own our own infrastructure. We provide capital maintenance and projects on that sewer infrastructure, but it's the day-to-day maintenance is provided by SAM under a contract. And of course, the treatment plant is shared by multiple agencies under a joint powers authority that is funded by those different agencies. Of course, there's a ton of administrative oversight and support that happens within the city. We have to coordinate our own elections, which are then, we have to manage our own elections, which are coordinated with the county elections department. We provide our own communications, records management, HR, IT support, risk services, and legal support for the department so that they can go out and serve the community. Affordable housing has become a bigger part of our work. We have a housing specialist within our community development department who helps with policies, but also implementation of things like the rental registry and rent control, which were added to our operations this past fiscal year. And then additional programs come along or ordinances come along that require staff oversight and management, things like our local minimum wage, our smoking and tobacco ordinance. We've talked about adding speed limits or regulations around e-bikes on trails. Those types of policies and programs require staff to have a role in oversight, and some of that stuff can be contracted out or it can be taken in-house. I know that was a lot, but I think it's important context for what we do versus what other people do. And one of the things that we've got to do as we go into the budget year this year is find the places where maybe there's overlap and identify who is best to provide those services and work with other agencies to make sure that those services are being provided. And we may provide some support or some collaboration, but maybe we don't need to lead those types of efforts. As I talked about, we've got some vacant positions here. There's an opportunity this year to really look at what these core services are that the city needs to be providing, or as a council, from your values representing the community, should be providing even if we don't legally have to. And then how do we find other agencies to take on more responsibility in areas that maybe should belong to them in the first place. And the hope is by doing that, we can restructure, save money on our staffing costs, and be very focused on the core mission that a city like ours should have. And that really, at the end of the day, has to be defined by the council at a policy level with support from staff. So with that, I don't know how much of a discussion we want to have about this, or if you think that is helpful context as we think about prioritizing for this fiscal year, but we're happy to take questions and have a more robust discussion if we think that's helpful.
So we're going to take some public comments. I see there's no one online, and there's only one card so far. And remember, this public comments should be addressed on our council priorities, existing or desired. So you have three, the way we do public comment. Oh, we got some more cards coming in. Great. At least one more. The way public comment works is you'll have 3 minutes and you'll hear two tones. The first means you have 30 seconds left, and the second tone means it's done. You're finished, okay? So we'll start with Hal Bogner.
Good afternoon, council members. Last year at this annual priority setting meeting, I addressed concerns that staff had developed a vision for the city that had not been shared clearly with the citizenry, and that council had fallen out of touch with the electorate in recent years. Since then, a group which I helped to form, Let Half Moon Bay Voters Decide, collected over 1,000 signatures in 3 weeks last summer to ensure that voters could decide whether the city's future should include 5-story buildings, a major change akin to such voter-driven decisions to preserve the Main Street Bridge and to keep CAL FIRE. Staff and the old council resisted, but eventually we will bring this question to the ballot. In the meantime, voters replaced 2 council members with experienced and pragmatic citizens who have pledged greater openness and responsiveness. I urge this new council, or at least the new council majority, to focus on several important things to bring city finances, policies, and projects under better control. First, a new commitment to transparency, to make full financial and non-confidential planning and project information easily accessible to the public. Toward that end, I'm working with other citizens to launch the Half Moon Bay Transparency Project, and I hope you will direct staff to cooperate to the max. Second, to review major projects that have overrun their budgets and timelines, such as Carter Park, a huge time and money sink, and the Poplar Street project, which spent the entire $1.2 million grant on roughly 1/3 of the intended project goal for which the grant was obtained, plus an ever-growing amount of local taxpayer money with no end in sight. Only a few weeks ago, staff asked for and received approval of an additional 1/3 of $1 million for Phase 1, and Phase 2 is not yet even budgeted in last June's 5-year capital improvement plan. Third, to get a firm and accurate grip on the actual needs to house and support Half Moon Bay residents, workers, and businesses, rather than starry-eyed and open-ended projects that aim to solve ever wider regional needs, primarily at local residents' expense. Fourth, to carefully re-examine and correct costly and counterproductive programs, such as the recently enacted rent control regime, which raises housing costs in the name of affordability, while intruding dramatically on the privacy of many locals. I hope that you will keep these priorities in mind as you deliberate today and meet them in the months to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Hal.
I have copies of this for each of the council members.
Our next speaker is Nancy Fontana.
Thank you. I unfortunately was not able to go to any of the listening sessions, so I apologize because it would have been helpful for me. I didn't hear it mentioned, maybe it has been during the listening sessions, anything addressing the current situation with our federal government and the tariffs and the potential impacts that will have on the cost of things. I think the city should probably look at the priorities. I mean, keep them on their list, but some might have to get put off because you have to look at the ones that are the most important. I think anything that's got any fluff to it maybe should be put off, and you should focus on things that improve the infrastructure, the safety, and that sort of thing. Having worked for cities for my entire career, you have a lot on your plate. It's not just one issue, or, I mean, there'd be a current issue, could be housing, another issue could be the storms we've had, but there is still everything else that keeps the city going. And it gets a little easy to get sidetracked and focus on just one thing. And I'd like to see the city consider everything that it needs to pay attention to. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. I don't think we have any members. Oh, sorry. Our next speaker is Leslie Dumond.
Thank you. I'm Leslie Ann DeMann. I live at 517 Rousseau Francais, Half Moon Bay in Frenchman's Creek. First of all, I want to thank Mayor Brownstone and the people from the Public Works who came out to speak with all of us neighbors that were gathered together in Frenchman's Creek to talk about the fire dangers that are a threat to our neighborhood. A year or so ago, I emailed the city about a dumping that took place in the creek behind us. And that was done by a team that was clearing trees that were on the property behind the creek, which was in Half Moon Bay, but it belonged to the farm, who owned the farmland there. Those limbs and tree trunks that they put into the creek have been left there and are falling into the flow of the creek, and far enough down I can't see them easily, but I know they're there, blocking the water. My neighbors along the creek and I are also concerned about the fire danger from all of the eucalyptus trees that are in the banks of that creek and in the creek itself. My neighbors 2 doors down had 2 large trees crash through their back less than a year ago in a windstorm. And Les and I, my husband and I, had a tree break our fence in the past that come from the creek. We hope that the city will look into the possible funding available to remove the debris from the creek, and from the creek, those that are both the debris and the trees that are there growing in the creek, before we have any kind of a fire that might affect our entire neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Any other speakers? Okay, and no one from the online. Great. That closes our comments section, and I think we're going to take a break. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 2:30. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So what we're going to do next is we've asked each council member to make a list of their 3 top priorities. And so we're each going to have a turn listing those 3 top priorities associated with any projects. Maybe identify anything missing in the priorities, possibly assign new priority areas. So we have an hour, we have over 2 hours left in this meeting, so we'll start.
Mr. Mayor, sorry. In the agenda, there was just a moment for me to provide a little bit of context related to the listening sessions and last year's priorities, if I could do that before we jump in.
Great.
I'll be brief. I'll just spend a minute or two on that. As the mayor mentioned, we have held several listening sessions over the last couple of months. We also had an online survey where we collected feedback from the community. That was all compiled into a report that was attached to the agenda for today. It's also available on the listening sessions page of our website. The point of that report is twofold. One, it's to ensure that we capture what we hear. All of the notes and the feedback submitted online is attached to it, but also we've summarized it to focus on what areas were highlighted and really came out of those meetings. The council's had access to that. They've reviewed it, so I won't go through and review it, but all that is to say the council has heard from the community, they've listened, they've seen the summary, and that will inform some of the discussion today. The other thing that was attached to the agenda was an update on our current priorities work plan. We went through the same process last year, and the council developed their priorities, and then staff developed a work plan based on that then was adopted during the budget process. And that's what we've done over the last several years. Leading up to this meeting, staff has provided updates, status updates on all of those priority work plan items. And it's actually a 2-year work plan, so there's some future items there. There are certain things on that priorities work plan, council, that we have to keep moving forward on. You know, the housing element, for instance. We really don't have a choice to stop working on that. We're working with the state. We hope to get that finished. Updates to our land use plan. Some of the housing projects that we're responsible for reviewing the entitlements on. Some of the emergency preparedness issues that are listed. But a lot of it is within the council's discretion. Some of it we would want to have deeper discussions if the council said, you know what, we've got to get away from this. We may have significant investments, and sometimes there are just sunk costs that you move on from, but sometimes there are reasons why we've invested. And so I think our goal today is to understand the council's priorities, and then staff, like we've done in past years, will go back and start building a work plan. But instead of just bringing it back kind of in final form as part of the budget, I think we'd like to bring back a version sooner at a regular council meeting to have further discussion on a refinement, because it'll depend on how much change we see, but because we're looking at reducing our bandwidth a little bit here, we're going to have to reduce some of the work that we do. So I think this will be a little bit more iterative process than in past years, but you know, that will allow council a second bite of the apple in the next month or two. So that's all I wanted to share. I appreciate the time, and we can answer any questions about those existing priorities if they come up. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. I appreciate that, and I think that's a good process. Sometimes we try to wrap it all up in one day, I remember, and I don't think that. Yeah, I'd rather have staff have some more time to really synthesize everything we're talking about. So, again, the process we're doing is each council member will list their top priorities, and when we're all done doing that, we'll have another public comment session. So again, if you have a public comment and you're in the room, please fill out a card, and you'll have a chance to speak. Okay.
You're talking about, in terms of priority, like overarching categories as opposed to projects?
I think what we're looking for is overarching, like, it doesn't have to be the full, like, affordable housing. It might be, but also some of the projects that fall into that would be important to you, and they don't have to be existing priorities at all. things could change there, but I think it's a combination of thematic things with some projects that fit underneath that. Is that, yeah?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. That's how I organize mine, major overarching and then projects within that. So, okay, how about if we start with Councilmember Johnson? Did you?
I would like to wait and listen. First of all, because it's my first time doing this, I've got lots of notes, but I don't want to go in a direction that's incorrect, and I want to actually hear from previous council members on right direction. I think some of the stuff that I'm going to have is intertwining, so I think it'd be best that I don't do it first, just because I don't want to waste time.
Great. And of course, we will be repeating top project. I mean, that's part of this process. So staff can figure out, well, what are the trends? What are the agreed upon areas? So it's fine if, we're iterative and say, just like so-and-so said, similar feelings about that as a top priority. Great. So Councilmember Negengast.
Thank you. I'll make sure I'm in the mic here. I had just a couple of things in general about the priority. I thought about even another priority, perhaps fiscal sustainability, and some items that could be under that. To me, we're preserving and cultivating the public trust, whether that involves some type of a citizen budget oversight committee or not. We've talked procedures in place to ensure how do we limit these overruns on projects, or how do we know what to scope out a project properly? Because we're finding, to me, whatever grants we're getting is not covering it. And then, grants aren't free, even just the staff time to maintain them. So we're also, providing. So I just throw that out as a possibility, fiscal sustainability. And then on the wording of one of the other priorities, the economic recovery and development, maybe we just call it economic development and tourism. I keep hearing tourism a lot, and I thought maybe we could add that in there. And I have some items for that, but I'll pick my three and maybe add some later. Obviously, I'm going to jump on transportation. Transportation, circulation, and mobility would be my first, and I'm going to go right here at Highway 1 in Kelly. I want those raised mediums or pork chops removed. I would like to see a sidewalk on the west side of Highway 1 from Kelly down to the shopping center. Just specific projects. And I also believe it's important to go ahead and the timing with the land trust trail. I believe they're going to try to start this summer construction. I'm not sure of that. But try to coordinate the left turn movements at Highway 1 and Redondo Beach, especially if we're going to have horse trailers accessing the parking area. I think it's important to have that full left turn in and out at that intersection. If I go to public health and safety and emergency preparation, we need that safety element completed. I know we're looking to finish that, but I think that's very important, and to respond to the community. We have, we had that tsunami. Also, in the fires have the fire maps have now changed a conversation in our community. So we still have work to do, and we still owe the community some answers, what things mean, don't mean, how to respond when, for example, the tsunami. But I also would, Magnolia Park, I'd like to, that showed up in the public health safety and emergency preparation. Wherever that is, I think we could start something on that project. And I was trying to ask questions, I get it, you need a full master plan, but how deep, once you have something, can we do, just do phases and maybe partner with somebody? I heard a lot of the community would participate on one or more phases of Magnolia. Obviously, it's the city's responsibility, but possibly just get something movement. I also would like to, under public health and safety, coordinate maybe with the schools. We just heard about lack of things and how the schools have all gone to secured premises after school and on weekends. Maybe there's something the city could have an arrangement with the school to have it open on the weekends. Some kind of agreement, obviously that you should get into insurance and responsibilities, but perhaps there's something we could do to have the playgrounds and basketball courts open, working with the schools, and tennis courts too. That was the other thing that's come up. There's also, I think, I'm not sure if the encampments come under this section or if that's housing. I'm not sure. Interesting to me, the trails that we did this 20 years ago to connect neighborhoods in the shopping center to downtown, to have the ability to go from Main Street to Safeway without having to cross over the 92 walk, you had to go a lot of ways. Because I was wondering, how come we didn't have encampments 20 years ago? And what's happened, the trails has become actually a network to and from parking lots or access to the creeks. And something if we could do, I know there was some fencing that was put up a while ago when we built the project, but I don't know, and I've heard talk of a fencing program. So I'm just trying to figure out how we, help deter these encampments, because we've had a couple of fires. We've had people say they won't even use the trails anymore. I don't know the answer to that, but I was just trying to figure, what is it that we could do that falls in here to not, to discourage the movement going from from one location to another. It seems to me one location gets resolved and then it just goes to another area until enough complaints come in again and, having to deal with it, maybe, and I don't know what type of what we're talking about to keep things, the encampments to a minimum or actually have them none in there. And then the other would be the community climate resilience and sustainability. These are a lot of mouthfuls here. But stormwater was in there. I think we should, I believe if we know watersheds that are a problem or challenging right now, then we should address those instead of doing another study unless we need to provide further background. Now, I'm not saying we have to, we need to look at the city as a whole, but I know Pullman, Kehoe, and Seymour, these are always coming up whenever there's always something going on there, and it seems to me it's gotten, with these change in the weather, becoming more of a concern to the city and to staff. I know Pilarcitas is a problem. That can affect a whole neighborhood. So I'd like us to try and, if we know certain watersheds, to go ahead and address them specifically instead of doing another plan. Same way with the Parks Master Plan. I still, I guess, need to know exactly what that overall master plan is. But if we know parks, if we can start providing some of that as phases or however we can do that. And same with the community and climate resiliency. If we can address PG&E, that's something in there whether a council can get involved. Somehow, it's just amazing to me that power can go out this frequently in that area. It seems regardless, it's happening much more frequently than it used to 20 years ago. But if we can address that, and I know another concern that's come up along the power being provided when I was talking with folks about during my campaign was the electrification ordinance. I know that's on hold, but there's some that, do we even keep it on the books? I mean, maybe it just stays there until it gets, and I don't know who reactivates. I don't know what it means to be on hold, but do we, especially seeing what's happening on the coast, do we really want to just rely on one source of power, the electric power, and just still have the gas available? But and again, maybe just to keep it on hold is enough. But right now, those are my quick three priorities. Some suggestions, maybe some change in wording, and some projects related to those priorities.
Just for our staff, and we'll get, as this goes on, it'll evolve a little bit, but can you just go back and say what the top three categories were? Because I heard more than three, so I want to make sure we get it right.
Right. Some I was trying to reword. Did you get the rewording as I suggested?
I'm not sure. So
And
if you
I
could
added one in there
just
too.
tell
Well,
us.
I added fiscal
sustainability.
Yeah. I suggested changing economic recovery and development to maybe just economic development and tourism.
Oh, so you were, okay.
I was changing.
So that doesn't fall under fiscal sustainability. That's
No,
a separate
that's a
priority.
separate, just
Okay.
the title change. In fiscal, I had, in order to preserve and cultivate the public trust, potential citizen budget oversight committee,
Which we caught that. Yeah.
procedures on how we ensure projects are estimated correctly and or during construction.
And right now, I'm just looking for the high level.
The
make sure we get the
transportation,
categories
circulation,
right.
I
Okay.
have several projects.
Yep, we
Suggested.
caught those. Just want to make sure that's the category. And then health,
the other
safety.
was the community clients and resilience and sustainability.
Okay.
That had the stormwater under it. That's where I was looking at the specific, the three watersheds we know.
Yeah.
And then the PG&E issue.
Yeah.
How do we, and maybe that's not necessarily in this format, council being active, but if we could get something, I think,
Yeah.
to address that.
Yeah, we've got the details. What we're
public
trying
health
to
and
do is
safety,
figure.
too.
Yeah, so I'm counting 5 right there.
Well, I added some and just kind of threw it in there.
Okay. We'll try to
Sorry.
do our best to kind of get it into the table. So
Okay,
all
sorry.
right. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't like missing where they were combined or something. So.
See, I started before the rules came out, so, all right, sorry.
Yeah, you'll probably notice there's a lot of cross-pollination of the main categories, and we could start drawing lines because that's the nature of the beast. So, Councilmember Penrose.
Yeah, I don't like this format, and I'm not going to go along with it. My priorities are going to come out of this council setting priority session, during which all of the council members discuss what their priorities may or may not be, and then we come to a consensus between us after having heard the other council members about what our council, I don't want to take a vote and say, okay, she's got three different ones. How do they add up and what are the top three? That's not the way I want to do it. So I'm going to talk in terms of what my priorities are, and it's not three.
Yeah. Councilmember Penrose, I don't think that's the process going on here today.
I'm
Matthew?
unwilling to go along with the process. I said I'd like to change it for myself.
No, that's fine. I'm just saying what Matthew said is it's going to be iterative. Whatever we talk about today, they'll come back, take down everything we say, and then start, finding areas of agreement or disagreement. So that's going to happen anyway over a couple of council sessions before we finalize or vote on anything, so to speak.
I'll tell you what my priorities are. Okay, my number one priority is going to and will always remain to be affordable housing, because I think that is In terms of health and safety, the most important thing we can do is house everyone. And that includes dealing with the encampments, which are not caused by coastal trail connectivity, but by the fact that nobody has the money to afford housing in the state of California or even nationwide anymore. The affordability of housing is critically important. It's not just important to those with extremely low incomes or those with low incomes. It's extremely important to everyone with any income. So I think one of the things that we haven't done in the past is address the so-called middle class, and I would like to see us look at a project which might include the extremely low, the low, and the moderate income folks all together. That's affordable housing. In terms of cleaning up encampments, until we get a place to put our homeless, we're not going to get rid of encampments. They're going to happen all over the city the same way they're happening now. We clean out under the bridge. We got Caltrans to come in and help us clean out under the Highway 1 access bridge, and gee whiz, what happens 3 months later? It's encampments there again. We clean up behind the post office, come back. Okay. My number 2 priority comes under transportation, I guess, and it is completion of the East Side Parallel Trail. I think if we're going to do anything to help us with greenhouse gas, to help us with connectivity, to help our teenagers get to school, to help our commuters get to work, it is to complete that trail so that people can come all the way from Montara into Half Moon Bay. And part of that completion of that trail is going to cost money. It's going to cost appealing to our new transportation committee member on the County Board of Supervisors, Jackie Spear, enlisting her help in getting it done. She's helped us in the past. She may help us in the future. So I really want to see that completed. We've been doing it for years. It's been stopped because of lack of funding. I understand that, but I think if we keep that as a focus, we will help our town more than anything else. The watershed projects, I'm not sure how to approach that. I wanted to ask Maz a question. What is the purpose behind getting a citywide watershed project study done? How critically important is that in terms of our local flooding issues and our erosion issues, as opposed to working on separate projects like the Pullman, the Kehoe, the ditches?
So that's a great question. I think the higher-arching watershed management plan would take a close look at existing conditions and look at those types of scenarios as far as sediment transport, erosion, flooding, and then have a high-level existing conditions document, something that shows where our majority of problems are, and then starts looking at potential ways of resolving those issues. Then from there, you could take it and do a more standalone watershed analysis. So it really is, it's up to us. If we can do it on a high level all at once, or we can do the existing mapping of conditions for each watershed. And there's no wrong way to do it. I think it's just how we want to prioritize it.
So if we started with the individual projects, we would not be losing anything in the long run.
No, the existing conditions of that we would utilize that towards a larger overarching watershed management plan if we wanted to.
Right, so if we wanted to deal with Kehoe, for instance, we could deal with Kehoe, and we're not going to lose anything when we deal with Kehoe by not having an overarching watershed project for the entire city.
No, but there could be a cost savings if we do that existing, because that initial assessment is a lot of topographic survey and map review. So there is a potential for some cost savings by doing it all at once.
The other thing I'll just share in the discussions I've been over the last couple of years on this topic is that that's kind of how things have been dealt with over the years, is kind of piecemeal, one at a time. And we've never looked at the coastside watershed and how it interconnects on the east side of the highway. You know, all these projects we're talking about are west of the highway, but a lot of them share the same sources on the east side of the highway. And I think one of the ideas is by doing this comprehensive assessment, we might find some things we could do east that affects all of the watersheds. Maybe not all of them, but groups of them. And we won't know that until we have this overarching analysis.
We won't know it by looking at the Kehoe ditch and looking on the east side of Highway 1 and what affects the Kehoe ditch from there?
I'm not an engineer, I can't tell you that, but I think that was the idea.
No,
kind
I
of what you're
understand
talking
the
about.
idea, how
Yeah.
things were done. And when you have a lot of money, it's nice to do nice big projects and have everything look real pretty and have it fit in. But we are not in a position to spend a lot of money right now. So I am looking at what Paul had mentioned, which is doing the individual projects. And I just want to know if there's anything large that we're going to be, anything huge that we miss out on. And, you know, if there is, then maybe we shouldn't be looking at it that way.
I think Vice Mayor Ruddick has some input on that issue as well.
So one of the reasons for doing a plan is to qualify for grants. So at least at the state level, and I believe at the federal level as well, funders want to know that the project you are proposing for funding is part of an adopted plan that had community input, right? So that we'd like you to fund Kehoe Channel. By the way, it's included as a priority project in our watershed management plan, something like that. So there is a reason to do a plan. Do we have to reinvent the wheel by doing another whole plan? I'm not so sure. I think maybe we could have somebody review what we have, do a gaps analysis, and only spend money on any additional information gathering to make sure that the plan, that the projects we know we need to do are fully supportable. So we had a plan, Schaff and Wheeler, whatever it was. I don't want to do another whole plan. I want to fill the gaps if there are any, and use what we have to qualify needed projects for funding. And I'd like to just segue into another point that's related to this. May I? But this is kind of related to the response to. So you raised an excellent question about urban watershed management projects. And I think that's probably not the best way to categorize these sorts of projects. And I would like us to re-characterize them as stormwater projects, because I listened to the Assembly Water Parks and Wildlife hearing this morning on flooding. And the focus is on different kinds of flooding, but for many cities in California, it's not just fluvial from creeks, it's also what they call pluvial, from too much rain and too many atmospheric rivers, which they said are only going to get more intense. And so where the pots of money are falling into place are for stormwater projects. So I think we want to align our projects with the framing provided at the state and federal levels so that we can better position ourselves for outside funding. So I think what we want to do is call it the stormwater program, because ultimately, we might want to fund these sorts of things through a stormwater fee, which San Mateo and several other cities in the counties have already adopted. So I think we just want to align what it is we're doing with the overarching framework that is current with the state and the federal government. Urban watershed management is an approach that falls under, stormwater management and flooding protection and those sorts of things. So I wouldn't use that as the umbrella. I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you. That helps a lot. Another major concern of mine is something that we've been talking about but haven't really managed to get off the ground. And I don't think it's the fault of the city necessarily, but it is something that is important to our citizenry. And that is the relationship between the city and the school district, and how they do or do not cooperate on issues like recreation, emergency evacuation, a bunch of issues. I think that's critical, and I want that to be seen as something that we're really working on, because it affects a lot. We talk about, what are we going to do for our teenagers who have nothing to do after school now that they've got, at night they can have bonfires, they can have not bonfires, they can have pit fires on the beach at Poplar. But that's about all we've done for our teens. We haven't done anything else for them. We don't have a center where they can gather. And that's for all of our teenage kids. It also is a lack that our adults have. Not everybody plays pickleball during the workday. So, what are we doing to provide recreation? And I think if we had a stronger, more comprehensive relationship with our school district, we might be able to work out something that would work to everybody's benefit. The last thing that I want to talk about is our lack of internet connectivity on the coast. The problems we're having with PG&E tie into that, but it's also redundancy in our internet service. And if we're talking about emergency preparedness, and we're in our current condition with the internet and with PG&E, we're SOL. We are without luck. So I think we've got to look at that. I think, as Councilmember Ruddock said, the atmospheric storms are only going to get worse. Our erosion problems are only going to get worse. Our emergency evacuation plan is non-existent. Our tsunami plan is non-existent. None of it works. So I'd like us to be looking at those things. And I think for right now, I'm done. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Reddick.
Steve Hyman. Do you want to take that now, or you want to take that now, or? Okay. Okay, so, yeah, the overarching categories are difficult because they are often very intertwined, but I'm going to take a stab at it. So, the first one I want to talk about is fiscal health and sustainability. I think we want to continue to be a city, especially if we're heading into a recession. We got to get a handle on our expenses. And that means, fiscal review. I do support the idea of a citizens financial advisory committee, something like that, or, budget oversight. But it's not just a manner of managing expenditures. I think we want to look at how we're structured as an organization and whether there are efficiencies there. We want to, review our retirement liability. Are we putting enough, to that purpose? I think we want to look at revenues in the sense that, we heard from a lot of folks in the downtown business area about helping out with a lot of things having to do with Main Street. And I would like to limit our relationship there to taking care of the things that are really our responsibility, maybe doing a better job there, like, sidewalks, streetscape, using public works, to support, our tourist community and our downtown vitality. I don't want to pay for things that the businesses should be paying for or that a BID might pay for. And I laud them for finally talking seriously about a business improvement district, because I think they need to be doing, their fair share. What we can do based on core services, I think, we can talk about doing. We want to look at risk management. Are we doing a good job at that, and other things we can do to manage like legal expenses, insurance, and all that sort of thing. So just comprehensive, look at managing our fiscal health. And I would characterize the priorities, that and the subsequent ones, as sort of a back to basics plan, because I think we've sort of veered off that approach. And as a small city, I think we have to be really careful about that and very careful about mission creep, which you brought up earlier, and not taking on the responsibilities of other agencies. And I don't want to get caught up in other agencies' mission creep either. So, and I don't want to help them do their job. I just want us to do our job and let them do their job. If we can help coordinate, great, but I don't see us as active advocates in getting other agencies to do their jobs. The second would be public infrastructure. So I noticed, looking at the slides early on about the capital improvement plan, that a lot of things have gone unfunded in the last year or two. We're not putting money into IT, replacement, fleet, equipment, neighborhood traffic safety not funded, bicycle connectivity and safety not funded, trail maintenance not funded, Pillarcitos Creek restoration not funded, Safeway sewer main not started, local road safety plan not started. All those things are, to me, like core services. And, funding our IT and our fleet, our sinking funds, I guess we call them, that's part of fiscal sustainability. We don't want to be caught, having broken down vehicles with no money to replace them. We've got to be putting money into those accounts. So when I talk about infrastructure, I'm talking about streets, roads, sidewalks, trails, parks, utilities, stormwater. I think stormwater is a big one because as we have seen, we've had sort of sketchy winters, some really big blowouts one year, the next year almost nothing. But according to the experts, we're only going to get bigger and worse storms. And maybe there's not large frequency of them, but the ones that happen will be way more intense and do way more damage. So we haven't done much in stormwater. We've been kind of, nibbling around the edges. And so I think stormwater's got to be a big part of our infrastructure spending starting, this year. I would like us to do a community garden, but I want us to make sure that we're keeping up with our street maintenance, sidewalk maintenance, because at base we are a tourist community. And if we are going to have sustainable revenue from being a tourist community, we have to demonstrate care and investment in our infrastructure. And it benefits us in two ways. It benefits the people who live here, and it benefits people who visit here. And I'm open to, just hearing from others about specific infrastructure projects. But for me, we've got to get back to that. And maybe we do a condition analysis. What does it look like, our streets as a whole? What does it look like in terms of sidewalks? How many have we fixed? How many are left to go? But we need to get back to that and make sure, I had to repair siding on my house at great expense to myself this year when I would have liked to, do, comfortable yard things and a fire pit and all that stuff. But I figure I have to protect my house. So I want us to do the same thing, getting back to basics, taking care of our foundation. The next one would be public health and safety. So that would involve, making sure that we get a fair sheriff's contract in the next year. I think we need to deal with a local road safety plan, and there's outside money that would help us do that. But, if we don't have safe neighborhoods, if we don't have safe streets and safe sidewalks, people are not going to be happy. And we want people to be happy, and we want a good quality of life here. So we have to make people feel safe. And that means like having solid emergency response, adequately funded. We want to, a priority for me, because it's my district, is the problems of repeat outages in Kenyatta Cove, Moon Ridge, Ocean Colony, and other areas along Highway 1 south of Seymour Street. So I want that to be a priority because it's third world country kind of stuff, and I don't want us to be a third world country. They're still part of an urban boundary, called Half Moon Bay. So we want to fix that. And I understand your concern about homelessness. And I think we have to be compassionate about it. But where I draw the line is environmental damage caused by homelessness in the encampments along Pilarcitos Creek. We don't let anybody else put their poop in the creek or tear up vegetation or set fires or any of that stuff. It is against the law. And I want us to enforce that. And I want us to work with the county to make sure that getting people out of protected areas and areas of sensitive habitat and water quality issues, they should be given priority for housing. And I know that there's lots of people in those areas who consider themselves urban camper and don't want shelter. And you know something? Take shelter, because I'm not going to tolerate urban camping that destroys our environment. So we have to do it sensibly. We have to do it in terms of partnerships. And by the way, fiscal sustainability does mean nurturing our partnerships and coordinating with others. And homelessness is one way we have to do that, because it's only getting worse. But I don't feel that as a steward and trustee for my community that I can accept environmental damage caused by this. So there has to be a safe place for them to live. I totally get it. But I'm against allowing further environmental destruction because of it. So just to sum up, fiscal health, public infrastructure, public health and safety are my top 3 priorities. That's the best back to basics plan.
Thank you.
So that was very informative, and I appreciate what you input, everybody's input. I made notes, and I didn't do that great of a job, but this is what I've got. I definitely want to make sure that we have what Hal brought up forward today was financial responsibility to make sure that when we do get our grants, we don't sit there and dump millions of dollars into something that we didn't know about and have 50 over, things that we didn't see and foresee. I definitely want to make sure that we have somebody in place or a project manager or something that is accountable for this stuff, and so that we don't sit there and don't finish projects under the grant and then find out that half the project wasn't done. Those are the things that I don't want to see happen from now on. I definitely want to make sure that we have some kind of oversight committee that can basically watch over this, so we don't have, a huge time and money sink is what Hal brought. But these are thoughts that I thought, but I just thought it was easy to just look at his notes. The other one is I definitely would want to be grant hunting since we don't have money, but I also want to make sure we apply the rules that we talked about, so that if it's $1 million, then it's $1 million, and if we have a little bit overrun, and why, and make sure that that person brings that forward. My number one thing would be to spruce up downtown and try to enhance tourism. That would be my main thing. Shops and hotels and bike paths that lead to the Ritz-Carlton would be great. I know that costs money, but that's just an idea. The park and ride idea is, I thought to myself, they're driving over the hill, they're parking their bikes, and they're riding our pathways. That will bring tourism to us. It could be lunch, it could be bike shop, it could be shopping, whatever. I want people coming to our town, spending money. I know it creates traffic, I know all that, but we're looking at 40% of our revenue is TOT. Our sales tax is what, 10%? We're doing pretty good from what I understand. We're not as high as we normally are, but sales taxes are doing okay. Tree management would be one of my things because of the power issue, loss of power and internet. People are working from home, they don't have internet, they don't have power, they can't work from home. And that's one of the big blessings in our town is the fact that people can work from home and not be on the roads, because we're talking about traffic all the time. And so when people don't have internet and don't have power, then they're gonna go and commute back again. So we wanna keep that balance to the point where that's working and in place. I would definitely want to be, I know it's not my district, but Kenyatta Cove and Ocean Colony, they brought their people and they made it very clear. We can't use the Rule 20 because we gave away those points, plus Maz said that it would take a lot of points to do that, to do underground. but there might be alternatives, there might be backup batteries, solar, things of that. So open up our horizon on what we could do and figure out a system that would work for the people in the south grid, because that's the most problematic. The grid on our side, I've had many people on Kehoe talk about transformers blowing out, because I've seen it, I lived it. They're old, they're from the 60s, and they're very unique in their own way. The power poles, if you look on Kehoe, they're unique compared to all the other ones. The transformers are basically the poles integrated with it, so now they're starting to switch over to the old-style poles with the old-style transformers. I've seen the line come down, I've seen it land on somebody's lawn across the street from me, and it literally put a 1-foot burn mark right in the lawn. So all you need is one person to get hurt like that. On the ditches, that has been not going on for years now. We haven't gotten anywhere. Kehoe ditch is still where it's at. Pullman ditch is still where it's at. And I was off the Planning Commission in 2014. I have walked the area with Mr. Benjamin, which was very informative. It was a 2-day walk. And yes, we need to look at the east side, because the east side I didn't know it and I didn't think about it. And he brought it to my attention. All the east, everything that's happening on the east side is draining through and down. So Rocket Farm is an area that's the Pullman. The Kehoe is across the street where Terrace and all that is, where that property that we own, that's all flooding. So it's all coming down as fingers, and it's all leading into one spot. So I think we do need an overall picture, but we need to address it. But I understand the financial issues with this, and I get all that. And I don't think it's a spot area that you can just kind of say, oh, we're going to fix this corner and this berm over here. But really the problem's upstream. So we have to look at the big picture. And I don't know what to say on that, but other than the fact that I do think we need a master plan for that to do it correctly, because we can always do a repair, and then it just happens again when we have that major rush in water. Bluff tops and safety, we have a lot of bluff top issues, but if we really centralize that and figure out why that is, it's because there's too much stormwater coming down, and it's eroding all the bluff tops. And that's also apparent when you look at it, and it's also sea rising and all those things too. But we have so much water going down there, it's creating issues. Now, on the ditches, when we talk about what we heard people talking about today, you have a lot of willow trees that are in those ditches, and we have a lot of eucalyptus. And once you start getting flooding in that area, those eucalyptuses are going to come down, and it's going to create a major problem. It's going to cause flooding down the road or upstream. Seen that happen in the housing encampment areas, because they're actually cutting the willows down. And I've seen it to the point where they almost chopped the whole tree down. And it was not a small one, it was a big one. So on that note, the encampment definitely needs to be resolved. I don't think that we should have people in the riparian habitat area. As Debbie said, we're not allowed to cut the willow trees. We're not allowed to poop in our creeks, and we're not allowed to camp in them. So we need to have an answer for the homeless, meaning if we do remove, I think it'd be a great thing to have an area where we can actually have a designated area for if they want to camp, because they don't want shelters, because a lot of them I've talked to, they really want to be on their own. If we can figure out a place that actually, number one is they want trash containers. They would like to have a bathroom or a shower or something, basic necessities. I don't think that's in our budget, but if we can come up with something, that'd be good. So if we move a group of people from one area, we have a place where they can go. I know that's fantasy thinking, but it would be great if we can think outside the box. Urgent care on the coast, I think, is important. We don't know if that's going to stay, and if we don't use it, we're going to lose it. I think at this point right now, with the way things are going, we don't know the total of what we're going to have or what we're going to have in concrete for our urgent care. We definitely need urgent care for people on the coast. So we need something in stone. We definitely need an x-ray machine, and we know where that x-ray machine is. We need it to be here. We need it utilized, and we need it for people so we don't have to drive across the 92 to go get an x-ray done or something like that. So we save lives. That's what we need to do. We need to get that x-ray machine. Measure D, I think we have issues. We need ADUs to be approved a little quicker and easier. Sam Licardo actually put that in his Bible, but he has a different focus on that. But on the coast here, if we have a home that's available, that somebody's doesn't need 5 bedrooms and single woman that we got over when we were doing our listening session, there was a lady that called and says, I have this big house. I'd love to do an ADU. I will rent out the other half. And so those kind of creative ideas, I think, needs to happen. And we also need to have, for medium class, I guess moderate income, I looked it up, moderate income is, as Penrose said, we have to do not just for one group, for all groups. And we have an issue because when you read in our packets here, not the ones that we have now, just the moderate income people, the residents here, their kids are staying in the house until they're about 32 years old, 27, 32. There's a statistic. Now, it'd be great if we had ADUs available, we had low-income housing for the people on the coast that live. We don't even have bakers that actually live here on the coast in a safe way. If you notice, no bread, no cupcakes, no nothing, because we don't have people that can live here on the coast. So if we could provide housing for our workers, that would bring us bread and cupcakes, that would bring the tourist people happy, all the things that we have here. It's not all about low income, which I'm not saying no to, I'm just saying we have to open the horizon up. On that note, I know I'm all over the board because everybody categorized everything, but that's basically what I have. And let me see, there was something else. Parks and recs, whatever we can do. We have a limited budget, but we definitely want to utilize or make them as mostly as attractive as possible without spending a lot of money. If we can, keep them maintained. On that note, the medians, I'd love to see maintained things that are easy fixes to make people go, wow. Every time I go to a meeting and they ask, where are you from and what do you represent? I say Half Moon Bay, and they all say, wow. They love Half Moon Bay. So that's what the general consensus is here. We need to drive down from 92 and enter our town with that gateway that we have and look at every little details of how it looks. And we could do simple things like, for instance, I get off the bus on 294 right where the, the cemetery that's there on the right side. And I walk down and there's dirt down on the bottom, there's weeds growing on the sidewalk. There's no maintenance there. Little simple things just to make things look good as you're coming into town. You look up on the street lighting, there's a big cable hanging down, looped down because they didn't hang it correctly, and that's something the Caltrans apparently has to deal with. When you push the button for your, when you cross from Safeway or on the other side to go to Safeway so I can catch the trail where McDonald's is, you hit the button and it doesn't tell you, and if you were blind, you wouldn't know when to cross. It doesn't talk to you. Little things like that need to be addressed, that need to be fixed. So basically, you could see how many seconds to cross that pathway. Potholes are definite. We need to try to get a hold of that if we can kind of keep that under control. And there's a lot of issues on potholes all over this town. And that's something I think we can do, basically what we talked about today. Some of those potholes can be dealt with in-house. But if we can stick to the basic core, make our city look beautiful, not have these huge potholes, clean it up, make it bright, and attract tourism. That's basically what I've got.
Thank you. My turn. Well, some of this will be a little repetitive, some not, but I also want to reinforce some ideas other folks have come up with. My really top category is public health and safety, but that really brings in a lot of other pieces, especially around community climate resilience. I mean, most folks, we're under a lot of pressure now. Fire, for example, we just had our maps redone, right? By Cal Fire, almost the entire coast. Well, I looked at the map when I typed in my address, all of a sudden it went from moderate to high fire. We have drones that are circling our town, and people get mail saying that their fire insurance is canceled. And because of X, Y, and Z, very little warning. And now we have a map, a new Cal Fire map, where if I was the insurance company, I wouldn't be surprised if that's where they're guiding their drones, right? We've laid breadcrumbs now for them. So, And that's just fire insurance. And now we talk about flood insurance as well, in terms of our climate. And the climate's only going to get worse. So all these issues we're talking about, which Patrick mentioned, you know, where does the water start? It starts somewhere up on a hill. Areas that we have no control over, and it's all coming down. And it's going to get worse because we're going to have more rainstorms, exacerbating that situation. So we do need coordinated plans, you know, with county and other agencies, like what do we do about diverting that water at the sources? You know, how do we alleviate some of that? And God knows we can't afford to pay for all that. So, but I really liked what Vice Mayor Ruddick was saying about, you know, paying attention to the bills coming down from the state so we can figure out where we can align those opportunities as those funds start to come together. So I really appreciate that. That is strategic approach. So thank you for that. Well, Paul and I share a very strong concern about the Kelly and Maine intersection, which has been there. That issue has been there forever. And we really shouldn't be paying for that. Caltrans is supposed to be taking care of it. And so I think we've had it on an agenda to bring them back and relook at that, because apparently they originally did plan on taking care of it. And then there was a budget issue for them, and they came back and said, no, they can't do that anymore. But I think that's part of a very doable negotiation. You know, they've got a five-mile project. So let's bring them that back and say, tell us how much it would cost if we put off part of, you know, I don't know, a half a mile of the 5-mile project. Just start talking to them to get those pork chops taken care of, put in lights that work. Don't talk about some weird blinding light that they were going to put up to warn cars coming. That sounded like they would just as easily blind people as help the situation. So, so yeah, it's just such an important intersection because we have so many school children and their parents crossing that. So to me, that's a major public, I don't know how we could emphasize more what an important public health and safety issue that is. In terms of PG&E, I'll admit I have biases against PG&E. I'll be honest. There are so many different things that they have done over the years. And, you know, we have to remember PG&E, you know, they call itself a public utility, but it's a stock. It's a publicly traded stock that, and then like most companies that are on the stock exchange, their main concern usually is shareholder value. So not necessarily if we were a community like Palo Alto that completely controls their, you know, they have their own public utility structure. So they are always concerned about the health and safety of the people in Palo Alto. PG&E is looking at its shareholders and making sure, I'm not saying they don't care about the public, but the priority is always going to be shareholder value. And there was a point where the state was really close to taking them over, but you know, they brought in the money and so lobbied against doing that. That was quite a number of years ago, but in the meantime, that's who we have to deal with. So, can we put the power lines underground? And it doesn't sound like that might be feasible. A lot of those power lines are still coming over windy roads, which is why it's hard to maintain for PG&E. Is it hard or is it just expensive? You know, that's the thing I would like more clarity around. You know, there's a difference between hard and expensive, And yeah, it takes more PG&E trucks going up there every year and cutting back those branches away from the power lines. There's other parts of the city that maintain more of their power because that's taken care of. It's not as hard to maintain. So again, it's not like there's not a solution, but how do we get them to pay attention? And when we got a lot of the feedback from the neighborhoods that were sustaining really intolerable shortages of power and breakdowns, they were throwing up their hands, folks in those neighborhoods saying, can you influence PUC? So that's where we have to maybe deal with some of our state legislatures and see what pressure they could put on them. But I don't really have a solution, until people can really, PG&E needs to have incentives to do that. And whether they're incentives based on, if you don't do it, here's what's going to happen. But yeah, so it's as much a political issue as anything else. I mean, because the solutions are out there, I think. So yeah, Maz and I did take a tour of Frenchman's Creek, and it was a really good turnout. And we were looking at the embankments. We were looking at the eucalyptus trees. Now, how many of you do live near eucalyptus tree groves? Anybody here in the room? Yeah? Okay. And by the way, it's not just in Half Moon Bay, right? It's up and down the coast. So it is a major issue, a fire issue. Well, not just a fire issue of trees loosening up. Some of them are 100 feet tall, falling over and taking out homes. And it costs at least $15,000 per tree. So, someone said, we could get a $1.5 million grant. Well, that takes care of 100 trees, but there's a heck of a lot more trees than that. So we are looking at some out-of-the-box potential approaches to that. I'm thinking, the communities that are most concerned, how do we engage? Maybe some other ways of figuring out how to pay for those, maybe taking out long-term loans where people who live in those neighborhoods can help contribute. But it's really just going to get worse. So, and believe it or not, there's also some really out-of-the-box ideas about companies that want to harvest eucalyptus trees for their fuel. So I know that might sound a little far out there. How would that happen? But believe it or not, we're looking at some of those solutions. In other words, we'll get paid to have the eucalyptus trees removed for their fuel. So what else? As part of public health and safety, a third of our population is Latino, and based on current government policies to arrest folks who are undocumented, maybe separate parents from their children, there's a lot of fear in those communities. And these are the folks who work on our farms, work in our restaurants, our stores. So I think the more we can make some immigration resources, legal resources available, and I think we've started to do that, but I think the more that we continue to do that, it really doesn't, bless you, it really doesn't cost anything much to do that. But there's quite a number of organizations now which have working with immigration services, and the more we can get that information out to students in the schools and to those communities who feel affected, it's not that we can necessarily prevent those things from happening, but we can help people know their rights and when they have to let people into their homes or not. And I think if we get that information working with the school system, bless you, those students are bilingual. So they can help educate their parents. They can help educate folks in their community. So again, it's just being strategic and helping people know their rights. In terms of, so I think I've covered everything under public health and safety. One other thing that came up, I just wanted to remind our own council of the Wave Crest Trails project, which the Coastside Land Trust is now actually in its stage. They're ready to start building. So building the bathrooms, building the parking lots, etc. We made a commitment at that time that it came before us to make sure that Redondo Beach Road, gets paved. And, there's some arguments back then about, we should get the coastal commitment. But anyway, I know that I and others on the council said, it's really on us. It's our roads, so we should get them paved. And I just want to keep staff aware of that. If they're going to start, if Coastside Land Trust is going to start bringing their contractors on board to build the parking lots and pave those, the bathroom areas, let's, work with CLT to know when that'll happen, and then, work out a deal with our contractors to also do pave the roads at the same time. We could save money. Economic recovery. I am a big fan, since second my priority, for the downtown business infrastructure improvements. Now, a couple of our council members met with those downtown business groups recently. And I know in the material we got, it was broken down, their recommendations in terms of enhanced signage, street and public space enhancements, policy enforcement needs, traffic improvement ideas, visitor engagement. They got a whole bunch of bullets under each section. I think that's great. I think we should continue to engage that group. I think all council members should come to some of those meetings. Let our businesses know that we're behind them, and start picking off the ones that aren't expensive, and help them. So the more our businesses feel they can be successful, and that's what tourists want to see. They want to see business places that look nice. And, you mentioned a few of those other things, and the curbs, and, we can have all the neat signage and stuff, but once people hit those streets downtown, I think we should really work with our businesses, use their ideas. They know best about what they feel, can work for their businesses. Last area, affordable housing. So I wanted to address something that was mentioned by Councilmember Johnson. The idea of we want to have affordable housing, obviously for everybody. You mentioned workforce housing. Now, it really depends on which parts of the workforce we're talking about, because you mentioned, low income, moderate income, and then there's very low income. So most people, a lot of people who work in the workforce here, because you said the people who, work in the bakeries, right, and the biscuits, they'd be classified most likely as low income based on current standards of what low income is. It's like up to, if you have a couple, it's like $110,000. That's low income. Yeah. The reason I bring it up, we just have to be careful of some of those terms, because how we can get funding, or how we can get, whether it's private or public contractors to come in where they can make enough money, where they can have mixed housing. We really need to figure out, who's impacted by that. The second you get into the word like middle income and modest income, that's like a lot of money. Now we're talking $150,000 a piece. So it's just think about when we have those conversations, which folks we want to figure out how to get housing for, and then who's out there, being able to build that without costing the city money. If it's nonprofit contractors, it doesn't cost the city that much. Some staff time, but it doesn't cost the city as much money. And maybe we can also have a blending of private and a nonprofit. So that's my thoughts on affordable housing. Stone Pine's moving along. 55 Kelly, I think we should try and get that taken care of as quickly as possible so we can also get our housing elements approved. And I agree, we really, I'd have to hear a little more about the financial oversight group. I mean, I don't want to start inviting Elon Musk wannabes into our business, but I would need to hear more what that looks like, because some weird stuff on Nextdoor that, makes me wonder what people are thinking about when they're thinking about that oversight. One thing. One thing for sure is we got to make sure that that staff has help when needed to project plan, some of these expensive projects, so we can make sure, that we have enough reserves. If a big grant comes in, that we keep enough in reserves, because we do constantly have to confront unexpected issues, the flooding, this and that on projects, and the ever increasing costs of supplies. And I'm not going to say I'm an expert on tariffs, but there's a couple of different schools of thoughts on that, and one school of thought is it's going to continue to drastically drive up the cost of supplies. So again, it's something we need to think about. Okay, I'm done. Thanks. Vice Mayor Ruddick would like to add a couple. And by the way, as we all talk, others might have some things that they didn't think about now that they've had to hear everybody. So if you want to add a couple of things in, that'd be great.
Yeah, to Councilmember Johnson's point about Measure D, I don't think I have to mention this as an addition, but I do still support the idea of looking at Measure D exemptions for ADUs. So I expect we'll continue to pursue that. I do support, now I know that Councilmember Penrose has been working on this, permit streamlining, especially like for downtown businesses. Totally support that, so I want to be on record for that. If there's a way that we can, remove impediments to like new food businesses starting up, whether it's getting rid of conditional use permits or something like that, I do favor this streamlining approach, and I hope we get on that quickly. But, one thing that we've kind of just sort of let go is, doing the implementation ordinances necessary to implement fully our land use plan, our local coastal land use plan. And I think we have to start that work, because I think there's risk involved in not doing that work. We say we rely on the policy, but there are people who challenge that reliance. And so I think we need to initiate the start of the IP for sure. So I just wanted to add those.
Anyone here have anything to add?
I think there's a couple plans that are actually really outdated. The last updated was like 91 and 92, the noise ordinance plan, and there's another one in there that I brought forward. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they're really old, outdated. They just look, if you read through your general plan, there's a couple of 1991, 92.
There we go. Can you clarify, are you talking about the elements of the general plan, the noise element and the...
Noise element, just coming off the top of my head, was definitely, and there's another one. If you review the plan, you'll see a lot of them are outdated.
Yes, yes. I just wanted to make sure I knew what you were talking about. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind that has been on, I think, all of the council's mind for a while is the empty storefront on Main Street and the shame that that brings on our city. I've heard countless tourists say, "What's going on? What's happening to that building?" Every time I pass McDuter Park, which is probably every day, I see the attorney's building right next to McDuter, which is empty. Windows are dirty. Looks like there's trash inside. It's a disgrace. And I don't know where we go with it. I think it's a lot to ask the public to come up with a tax. It's a lot of money. But I think it might be easy to have an ordinance where we set a fine and have a fee, a monthly fee paid by anybody who has an empty storefront. It's just a thought.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would second that. But also, I think we need to revisit the tax on second empty houses. I mean, there's so many just in my neighborhood alone. Beautiful homes just, sitting, empty. And I think part of our housing initiative has to be to free up resources to support, the affordable housing. Like maybe we want a kitty generated with fees that can help people, fight legal battles to stay in their homes rather than being evicted. And maybe we need to broaden our view about housing, not just new individual units, but, things like home share and co-housing and maybe even, used to be, what do they call them, boarding houses? But is there a way to, to expand our view to sheltering people as opposed to just building more residential units? I think we've, in our frenzy to comply with the HCD, we focused on, just physical units. But I think we need to take the broader view of helping people find, shelter and putting roofs over their heads. And it's not necessarily building new units, but it's new living arrangements maybe to support. So I don't want us to forget about that piece. Maybe helping people buy a home together, tenancy in common or something. I just think there's probably untapped potential there. I just wanted to raise that.
All right. So this concludes the beginning of our priority setting discussion. It's now time for public comment. I don't see anybody online. I have one. Did anyone turn in any more requests? No? So I just have one. And Steve Hyman, you have your 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for letting me speak. I came here this afternoon hoping to hear how you were going to reduce the deficit you have. As you may know, I was very opposed to the sales tax increase that was approved in November. I felt you had a financial problem then, and giving you more money would not necessarily go to reducing the deficit, but to increase spending. And just reading in the review this week that the $4 million deficit with the $2 million sales tax revenue equals a $3 million deficit. And I know you fund your deficit by depleting our emergency reserves. I believe over the last few years they've been cut in half. And maybe now, based on your current burn rate, you have 2 or 3 years, assuming the assumptions all stay the same, and your reserves will be broke. I have listened here for 2 hours, and I really haven't heard anybody saying, how are we going to cut our spending? I hear many new projects, and I'm not going to argue that they're not needed, but you really are in a crisis situation. You've had this financial deficit for years. You've ignored it. You just kicked the can down the road by taking our reserves that we may need for some horrible emergency. And you really need to take the meat cleaver out. I know I wrote about Half Moon Bay needs its own Doge. And by the way, I am a big supporter of that. I think those policies are probably overdue by 25, 30 years, so it's not a Republican or Democratic issue. We have elected officials in the city, state, and government who say they have oversight but just keep spending, and nobody's looking at the books, and it's a mess. I know you keep talking about grants. I think you may want to rethink that, because it wouldn't surprise me if grant money is slashed significantly. So you really need to think hard about how you're going to cut your deficit. And like I said, I sat here for 2 hours and I really am walking away thinking you're just going to deplete our reserves to keep on spending. Thank you very much. And by the way, if you ever want to talk about tariffs, I have a master's in international finance, worked on Wall Street. We've needed tariff reform probably going back to World War II, where we rebuilt Europe and Japan, and those tariffs are uneven, and hopefully they'll be fixed, but that's another day. Anyway, thank you again.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks you for that invite. I'd be happy to have a out-of-council conversation with you. Okay. But I will say a couple of things about our budget. One of the reasons we didn't talk a lot about the budget is we just actually had a whole council meeting reviewing our budget. All our budgets are quite transparent. Ken went through all the budgets, we just had a very in-depth review of all our CPI projects, where our money goes. So when people talk about transparency, I think we're very transparent. Now, whether that means we are handling everything the way we could have or should handle, that's always up for argument. But in our last budget report, which Ken went through, and I try to be very careful to make sure what I thought was one of the takeaways. And this time last year, we had a projected deficit of $4 million. That's now at $3 million. So I would say to you and others that in a year, we've actually reduced our deficit by about 25%. Now, I'm not going to do, this isn't a back and forth, but I'll talk to you afterwards. I'd be happy to. So the city's actually made quite a bit of progress. Did we dip into reserves at one point because some new expenses came up? Yes, we did. And we hate doing that. And I've never seen a council more devoted to keeping those reserves up. But actually, our percentage of reserves is higher than most cities right now because we put so much in. We more than doubled what the average city percentage-wise puts into reserves. So we're still kind of over, what most cities would be at. You say, we're on the path that we can't be sustainable. I disagree. We did cut our budget 25% in 1 year. We're not back filling positions. Every department came up with cuts of over 10%. The cities of Los Gatos and Portola Valley and others are actually going bankrupt and percentage-wise have much bigger deficits. So, again, I think we're on a good path. And so, yeah, I guess I just take issue with some of the alarmists that I hear that somehow, we're just we're heading off a cliff. I think we can be more and more fiscally responsible, and we've talked about some of that, some of the project management projects that have gotten out of our control, some of that, was out of our control, but it's always good to relook at our project management and think about how we look at a number of our, budget issues. But every time we have to cut, or move money from one thing to pay for another, we're usually very clear with the public, this is what we're doing. So we might have to sacrifice some CPI, some infrastructure projects, the ones that aren't emergencies or public threats, and move the money around. And maybe we will get grants, maybe we won't. Maybe we'll go through a huge recession coming up. I don't know. We don't know how much of our hotel, where it's going to look. I am always optimistic, but try and be realistic at the same time, as I think most of this council does. But always, thanks for the remarks. I'll be happy to talk to you more about it. Thanks. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Penrose.
Yeah, just to, one of the points that I didn't make when I was speaking was how much do tariffs affect the cost of our projects? And I'm wondering if our financial staff is looking at that, and if they need any help to look at that, I would recommend that we give them that help, because I think that that is looking ahead in a way that we need to look ahead. That's all.
I can answer that briefly. We work with Townsend Public Affairs. They are legislative support for us, and they're monitoring the very fluid situation very closely. Obviously, it changes every day, it seems like, but they will give us some initial thinking on this, and I appreciate that. It may be helpful to understand now. We don't get a lot of federal funding, and so that probably is an area that we need to be concerned about. But the cost of goods and services and the potential increases is, I think, what we're looking at, and that is really going to be dependent on what types of tariffs and what countries are affected by them. So we do have Townsend monitoring this at the federal level. They're providing advice to us. I think hopefully things will steady out enough that we can get some clear direction, and then we may take you up on an offer to get some additional support with that from an economic standpoint.
Yeah, my thinking is, in terms when we have a project and we have we send out an RFP and we accept someone into a contract, we always have a contingency fee. Maybe we ought to be considering a second fee, which is a fee about increased cost of materials fees, so that when we have a project, we don't come up with problems. We've been coming up with problems with cost of materials all through this past couple of years, as far as I've seen, on almost every big project that we've had. And we haven't planned for that in advance, and that's what I'm talking about, just having a plan in advance for it.
Yeah, and what that'll mean likely is, because our revenues aren't going to be any different, or our funding sources aren't going to be different, we're probably going to have to, as we've heard today, prioritize certain types of projects. And as part of prioritizing them, as you say, putting more money into the budget for them. And you kind of have to wait until we see what happens with those projects before we can pull those funds back and allocate them to different projects. So it probably will shrink the pool of prioritized projects to some degree if we take an approach like that. But it protects us from having a bunch of projects going at once, having them all escalate. Now we've got to make tough decisions about what partially completed projects we've got to walk away from. So I appreciate that insight.
Matthew, does staff have enough information to move forward towards our next iteration?
Here's what I would recommend. How are we doing over here? We've got some great staff who have been typing feverishly. I think our goal for today is to just make sure we've captured what we've heard from you today. And of course, we've got this recorded. We can go back and refine some of that. But that would be my goal today. And then, as I said, we'll synthesize it into kind of a priorities work plan, maybe not get into deep details, but at least some high-level things. Because there's decisions to be made about the new things we heard today versus what was already in our work plan. And I just think that's going to require some discussion among you all at a future council meeting in the near future, and then we'll finally refine it to a final work plan. So if that's okay, again,
Do you need a little break to pull it together?
staff, would a few minutes of break help? Yeah, if we could take a break.
Okay.
And then come back and we can quickly just confirm that what you're seeing on the screen matches what you said, and maybe identify some quick things we can tweak. And then I think we can quickly talk about next steps and be out of here plenty early. So.
Great.
Thank you.
So 10-minute break, about 17 after. To present things that they've been recording and can just share with us and make sure we got it right.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for giving us a few minutes, and thank you to staff, again, for doing one of the hardest things today, which is just keeping track of everything that's happening and in real time. But I think we're on a good path right now. So what I would ask of each of you, and I know it's small, and maybe Irma, you can zoom it in a little bit and kind of work our way through it. And for each of you to just kind of confirm, if there's anything glaring missing, we can go back and listen back. But Councilmember Johnson.
I'm not a big fan of the Gateway Arch, so you've got that. I don't want to put my name on that.
Okay.
I haven't seen it. I don't know anything about it, so I'm not. That's not what I was intending.
Let's see. Before we delete it, let's just make sure. Okay. No, I would go ahead and just delete that. Thank you.
I have one more.
Go ahead.
On the homeless support alternatives to get people off the creeks, fencing to prevent encampments, but I would like to have a ideal location, like I was talking to Chief Chichoff, like another area that we can find, potential area that they could be at, that we are saying, yes, you can be here.
So where it says alternatives, if we can just clarify that further, alternative locations for people to camp potentially. And the term that typically we use for that is like a sanctioned encampment.
And Mr. Chichoff did bring forward to me on when we're doing breaks, so he's probably going to talk to you about it. He had some ideas.
Okay, that's great. All right.
Just go through on mine. The priority one was, that was for a new priority, fiscal sustainability. And then citizens oversight, procedures to ensure project costs are estimated and, met. That was in the same one.
And that would fall under the fiscal sustainability.
Right,
Yep.
right.
Okay.
The priority two is just change that name to economic development and tourism.
Mm-hmm.
Right now it's economic recovery and development.
Yep.
That's all that was.
Okay.
Highway 1 Kelly, West Side, left turn, Redondo, Highway 1, and just the trail, the East Trail connection too. How I don't know when that goes because of the various projects that are still occurring.
Just to make sure I understand, you're talking about all the different sections of the
No,
East Side
so
Parallel Trail?
We prioritize those sections, but yes, all the sections to get from the north end to Main Street,
Okay.
which I understand on the east side, and then you would cross over and walk on the west side. And then
At Main Street or
Main
Kelly in
Street,
that area?
or
Yeah.
even Terrace now. You know,
Yep.
Terrace will have a signal.
Yep.
And they could connect there. And then health and safety, I've completed safety, parks, I wasn't, the Parks Master Plan, I was trying to, my concern was necessarily, it was more what are we doing versus, I go to the more, like Magnolia Park. I'd like Magnolia Park to be started.
You want that list? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so let's
Because
list
that was
that.
under health and safety. That's where parks showed up. Because I was trying to do it by priorities and trying to see where things in the existing priorities, where they were showing up.
Sure. And did you say something about doing sanctioned encampments as part of your
Well,
comments?
just how we discourage the encampments along the creeks.
Okay,
What we
okay.
do, because remember I was talking about the trails and parking lots.
Right.
Where it's easily accessed to get to the creek areas, but, how do we, reduce, when you move from one area, it goes to another area, so there's a bigger solution than what we're just doing. And then, stormwater management, empowering grid stability. Well, I think what, in there, I was wanting PG&E, Half Moon-based PG&E issues to be, to have some kind of working or something together, whether it takes a council member to get involved, which is under that 5 there. And the stormwater management, how we get to do, if we know specific watershed areas.
As opposed to just the overarching plan first?
Yes.
Pursuing the
If we have
specific
a
ones?
plan now, and if these, and I heard maybe we do have a plan now, that we can go into specifics. I mentioned the big 3 that I always hear, Pullman, Kehoe, and Seymour, which, when I say watershed, that takes it all the way up the hill, wherever it starts.
Okay.
Oh, that's it.
All right, thank you. Other council members, anything you see incorrectly articulated or missing from yours?
Yeah, one of the things that I had mentioned was the need for redundancy on the coast for our internet communications. And that goes part and parcel with our PG&E problem. They're 2 different entities, but they're both about communication, ability to communicate.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
I did mention under fiscal health and sustainability, reviewing expenses for possible cuts. And I mentioned under downtown vitality, I will add it later, but we're talking about permit streamlining and
Yes.
support for downtown businesses. All right, sorry about that. So under fiscal health and sustainability, I mentioned before organization structuring, restructuring, looking at that, not necessarily doing it, but looking at that. Also reviewing expenses for possible cuts. And then under downtown vitality, supporting, permit streamlining and other assistance based on our ability to do core services as opposed to other kinds of economic development. I think public infrastructure is pretty good. Instead of EMS funding, what I said is, funding emergency response. EMS is more like ambulances.
You're talking emergency preparation, disaster response?
Emergency preparation and response,
Yeah.
evacuation routes, that sort of thing.
Great.
I think the rest of that's okay.
Okay. Mr. Mayor?
Oops. Let's see. In column C, yeah, instead of where it says Wave Crest bathrooms, just collaborate with Coastside Land Trust when they do their paving, when they're doing their construction.
Around road improvements and,
Yeah, it'd probably be more when they're actually paving the parking lots, I guess, but yeah.
okay.
And I'm also, on column D, also interested in budget oversight, and then maybe in parentheses after oversight, the what and the who. So, I'm interested, but.
You're interested in learning more about how that would
see what
work
the details
before you
would look
know
like,
that's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
And, I think that's it.
Great.
I had one, because I talked about emergency services, like updating tsunami and evacuation plan. I don't think I see that on that. I didn't see it.
So it looks like it would go under priority 4, health and safety.
Right.
Yep.
I'm thinking maybe, send this particular document to everybody on council, and then let's say, if by the end of the week, you see a few other things or you might want to make, right? We can.
Yeah, we can send you your individual strips of it.
Yeah,
You
and then
can
we can
provide
send it
that, and then we
back.
can compile it together.
Yeah,
Yep.
that would be great.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sounds good.
Deborah?
I wanted to say one more thing about the homeless, and I want to say it because the homeless issue is on just about everybody here, I think, in one way or another. The homeless who camp on the creeks camp there because of the availability of water. That's why they go to the creek. That would be my guess. That's one. And the other reason is because it can be hidden. They can kind of hide in there. We need to protect our creeks. We need to protect the riparian area around the creeks. That's critical. It's a health and safety issue. The other side of it is we've got people with a health and safety issue who have no home. Now, there are certainly people who are homeless who won't go to shelters and want to live as outdoor pioneers. I don't think it's the city's job to be supplying their lifestyle at all. Absolutely not. That's a choice, but I'm not willing to take taxpayer money to protect that. However, I don't know how many of those are currently in our homeless population and how many are people who've recently lost their job or who have physical or mental health problems that keep them from being able to work and support themselves. And there's no public services to help them. I think there are enough homeless people who have legitimate reasons for being homeless that we need to address their situation. So if we're talking about cleaning up our creeks, I would have to agree with Councilmember Johnson's thought that maybe we need to find a space for them in our city where they can camp safely and not hurt our creeks. It's not something I am proposing. It's something I think would be a good discussion item. So that's all I wanted to say about that.
Thanks for that. I just wanted to point out that one of the reasons and one of the justifications for not allowing people to live in the riparian zone is, our waterways like Pilarcitos Creek have beneficial uses as designated by, the State Water Resources Control Board. We're co-permittees, there are rules and regulations about it. And so those sorts of uses impair other public benefits, like health, for instance. So, when we've been struggling, for a justification, we say, well, just don't allow camping. But I think there's there's more justification than that, and that it is an impairment of our ability to protect other beneficial uses is related to our requirements under water quality regulations. I would just throw that out there.
Yeah, in terms of homeless encampments, I'd be interested in hearing more from, you know, some folks like Eric DeBode and other folks on what they're thinking. Because my concerns are, let's say, well, first of all, we don't know how long we're going to have that same, for a while, quality of care that CARES has, you know, in terms of people out there all the time, knowing folks who they are, giving them support. So individual cases could simply get worse. But in terms of setting aside some sort of grounds for them to camp on, I'd be interested in what other cities have done in that regard, because I'm sure, you know, a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, if you create this real nice spot, isn't everybody going to hear about that and want to come down to our campsite? So how do other cities, if they do create something like that? Because the places I've seen that, people have created big sites for tiny homes, but it's very well organized, and it's in places where people, it's in places where communities had a lot of extra land to do that, right? Colorado and a few other areas, or Texas. So that's, yeah, those are some of my concerns with any solution. How has it worked in other towns and made that work, and what have they learned, you know, from their experiences? So.
Okay.
I do have.
Oh, go ahead.
Chief Chichoff had a meeting with Eric DeBode. I kind of put them together on this topic, so maybe you can have some input on that.
And I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you were saying.
I was just telling the council that I put you and Eric DeBode, because that was your first meeting with him, about this topic on the homeless. Can you share anything that you guys came up with? Was it yesterday, or it was yesterday, I think, right?
It was actually today.
Today.
We had to reschedule. Just basically sharing your concerns that it's a difficult problem. There is no miracle solution. There's no magic wand. What it's going to require is doing the same thing that we've been doing, is working together, looking for alternatives, trying different things. I was speaking to somebody earlier and saying that, unfortunately, this is a big problem, that it's not going to be solved all at once. It's going to be solved a lot like eating an elephant, one bite at a time. We can't help everybody all at once, but we can help a few people. And we just keep building off of that. So yeah, that was the gist of the conversation. And we're saying that it really does need to be a combined effort, preferably throughout the county, even though the coast is very unique and it does have special challenges. And a lot of the unhoused population on the coast is either from the coast or attached to the coast, unlike a lot of other places where they'll accept housing and services in other places. Say Palo Alto might accept services in Redwood City well before somebody on the coast would accept services in Redwood City.
Thank you. Any other questions on that? We're all good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, this is a little different than what we've done in the past, but I think we're on a good path. After this meeting, we'll get these notes, your individual notes to you. You can take one last review, kind of refine, tweak, make sure it's spot on with what you're thinking. And then we'll work on compiling this into kind of a first draft of a work plan. It'll have way more stuff than we can do, but it'll kind of share what we took from this and what we already had on the, on the plate from last year's work plan that continues forward into the next fiscal year. And then I think we'll do another workshop at an upcoming council meeting to really refine that into a work plan that fits within our resources, our staffing, and that'll kind of happen alongside discussions about how we restructure going into the next fiscal year, using some of our vacancies and our priorities around core services to kind of hopefully create a sustainable organization that allows us to work into the future and have a balanced budget and start building those reserves up again. So that's my goal for this fiscal year.
Can we get everybody's wish list? Each of us get, I'd like to see all the council members' wish list. Is that a Brown Act violation?
So this is a public document at this point. I mean, folks have been taking photos of it, so I'm fine circulating it. But I am, we don't want council members to be editing each other's wish lists, not in a public forum. So when we bring this back, of course, you could comment on your colleagues' wish lists. But I think what Matthew was suggesting was that if you have any refinements to what we just went through, send them to Matthew for your own priorities to ensure that we don't have any Brown Act violations. Yes, Matthew, do you have any suggestions about how to make this public for everybody?
Yeah, I think what we were just saying is we're going to post this on our priority setting webpage. We'll send a link out. It'll be a PDF, so you can't edit it. But then we will also send you an editable document for each of your individuals. So it's just a combination of both things.
Great, and my reason for asking that is I am still in the thinking phase of what I consider my priorities. And I really appreciate the other council members' input and take seriously what they consider their priorities. I am informed by them, so I want it to be part of my thinking. Thank you.
And I have a quick clarifying. So you have the existing 2024-26. You're going to include what we just did as part of that document? And then will it be in a format? So there was, the first 24-26 was a 6-page document, and it had a lot of breakdowns. Then recently, the 24-26 was the status notes on it, turned into a 4-page. So it was a little less, but still big document. Maybe it didn't have as many.
Just smaller fonts.
Yeah, I couldn't read it, so I just said, well, I can't read this one. So I went back to the 6. And just, are you going to remove things that have been either completed or not feasible? I mean, because I look at, we still have Bay City Flower Site in here. So obviously that didn't, this 6-page was generated a year ago.
Evaluated it,
so
correct.
I'm trying to see if this is the same format we're going to get.
It'll be similar, but yes, things that are complete, things that have been canceled, we'll strip that away. I'll probably take some of the detail out of it. And then it'll identify, this is new.
Yeah.
This is new, but it's related to something. And then this is stuff from last year. I'll also try to color code it so you know, like the housing element as an obvious example. You don't have a choice. We have to keep on this. You know, this has to be a priority. Versus other things where you've got discretion and you can say, you know what, I know last year this was prioritized. We're in a different place now, and we need to let this go or put it in a parking lot for a future discussion. So I'll try to get it organized in a way, and you know, I can work with the mayor and vice mayor to kind of refine it before it gets back to you all. Not the content, but how it's formatted so that it's clear for all of you and effective for all of you.
Okay, thanks.
So that'll be coming forward, and then of course, you know, we're through the mid-year now. We're making some adjustments to the budgets based on the feedback we got last week, and we're kind of rolling into budget development now. So as you know, we'll be bringing items forward related to the CIP, related to fees. There's a lot of work to do before we get to budget hearings in May and June. This is probably going to be one of the more intense budget periods we've been in, but we're also in a position where we've got to make a lot of changes. So hopefully it's this year, and then we can get back to a little bit more routine approach next year. So lots more to come. This is, again, the beginning, not the end. And we really appreciate the collaboration we saw today, the support of staff we heard today. We continue to have an amazing team that cares deeply about the community and wants to make this a wonderful community, or maintain what a wonderful community it is for everybody, and continue to enhance it. And I'm hoping we can find a structure that takes the strengths of the staff we have, puts them towards the right efforts that you all identify, and gets us in a fiscally sustainable position. That is, I think, everybody's goal. Our goal this year would be to limit or eliminate any deficit spending this year out of our reserves. That may be more of a goal than we can accomplish, but that is, at this point, from staff's perspective, the end goal for this year's budget, and we'll see where we get.
And to fully fund our reserves, not just stanch the bleeding, but, get in a position where we're fully funding them.
Yes, yes.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Giving you back 10 whole minutes to your lives. Thanks, staff. Thanks, members of council. This is always it can always be a little bit grueling, nerve-wracking process, but I think we got through it. And thanks for all the preparation staff did and all the work in the presentations. And thank you, public, for coming and seeing how we get some things done. So thank you.